When a waitress fleeing her past accepts a ride from a mysterious stranger in Santorini, she has no idea she's stepping into a carefully orchestrated trap. Marco Vel didn't stumble into her restaurant by chance. He chose her, studied her, and decided she would be his. But what begins as calculated obsession transforms into something far more dangerous. Real love between a mafia heir who's never been refused and a woman who refuses to be owned. In a world where power is everything, can two people rewrite the rules before his enemies destroy them both? If you're ready for a story about dangerous obsession, impossible choices, and love that refuses to play by the rules, stay with me until the end. And don't forget to hit that like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. The Aegean sun had a way of bleaching things, whitewashing buildings until they gleamed, fading painted shutters to pastel ghosts, and stripping away the pretense people carried from other lives. Lena Hart had come to Santorini hoping it would do the same to her memories, but 6 months in, she'd learned that some stains ran too deep for even Greek sunshine to erase. She moved through the narrow streets of Oya with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd learned to make herself invisible. Head down, shoulders slightly hunched, favoring her left leg just enough that most people wouldn't notice unless they were really watching. The limp was a souvenir from her old life, along with the scar tissue around her heart and a bone-deep wariness of men who smiled too easily. The restaurant where she worked clung to the cliffside like a stubborn barnacle, its terrace offering postcard views of the caldera that tourists paid premium prices to photograph. Lena had stopped seeing the beauty months ago. Now it was just backdrop, as familiar and unremarkable as wallpaper. She arrived 40 minutes before her shift started, she always did, and began the opening routine with mechanical precision. "You're early again," Costa called from the kitchen, his Greek accent turning the words musical. He was the owner's nephew, kind in a distracted way, and one of the few people on the island who'd bothered to learn her name. "You know Dmitri doesn't pay you for this time." "I know." Lena didn't look up from the napkins she was folding into crisp triangles. "I just like being ready." What she meant was, she liked having control over something, anything, even if it was just the precise placement of silverware and the angle of wine glasses catching the afternoon light. Control had been in short supply in her previous life. The lunch shift started slow, a trickle of tourists seeking shade and overpriced seafood. Lena moved between tables with quiet competence, smiling on cue, reciting specials in carefully practiced English that buried most traces of her Kentucky accent. She'd become good at this. The performance of normalcy, the art of being pleasant without being memorable. Then he walked in. Lena noticed him immediately, though she tried not to. Something about the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, like a predator that had learned to walk among prey without alarming them. He wore black despite the heat. Black shirt with the sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded with muscle. Black pants that probably cost more than she made in a month. Expensive sunglasses that hid his eyes. He was alone. In Lena's experience, men like this were never truly alone. They traveled with entourages, bodyguards, women draped on their arms like accessories. But this one moved through the scattered tables solo, ignoring the host's attempt to seat him near the railing with the view everyone wanted. Instead, he took the corner table tucked against the stone wall, partially shadowed by a climbing bougainvillea. The table that offered clear sightlines to the entrance and the rest of the terrace. Lena's stomach tightened with old instinct. She knew this type, had been burned by this type. Men who calculated angles and controlled exits, who chose corners over views because they valued tactical advantage over beauty. Men who were dangerous in ways that didn't announce themselves with raised voices or obvious threats. "I'll take table 7, she told Maria, the other server working the terrace. Maria glanced at the corner table, then at Lena with surprise. "Really? He looks like trouble, and probably a bad tipper." "I've got it." Lena was already moving, water pitcher in hand, professional smile fixed in place like armor. Up close, he was younger than she'd initially thought, maybe early 30s with dark hair that needed cutting and a jaw that suggested Italian heritage. He'd removed the sunglasses, and his eyes were the color of espresso, intense and focused in a way that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Welcome to Ambrosia," Lena said, her voice pleasant and distant in the way she'd perfected. "Can I start you with something to drink?" Water is fine. His accent confirmed her guess. Italian, educated, with an undercurrent of something harder beneath the cultured pronunciation. And coffee, espresso if you have it. Of course. She poured water into his glass with steady hands, hyper-aware of how closely he was watching her. Not leering. She would have known how to handle that. This was different. Assessment, study, like he was cataloging details and filing them away for later use. The grilled octopus is excellent today, she offered, falling back on script. And the moussaka is, I'll have the octopus. He closed the menu without looking at it, his gaze never leaving her face. And whatever you think I should try, I'm told you have good instincts. The phrasing caught her off guard. Too personal, too knowing. I'm not sure what you mean. You chose this table for me instead of the one near the railing. Better shelter from the wind. No sun in the eyes. You notice details. A slight smile curved his mouth, not quite reaching his eyes. I appreciate attention to detail. Lena's professional mask wavered. I'll put in your order. She retreated to the safety of the kitchen, her heart beating faster than the brief interaction warranted. Costa looked up from the grill, eyebrows raised. Table 7 wants the octopus, she said, keeping her voice level. And he's strange. Watch him. Strange how? I don't know yet. Just watch him. But when she emerged with his espresso, forcing herself to maintain steady composure, the stranger had settled into his corner like he belonged there. He accepted the tiny cup with a nod, those dark eyes tracking her movements with uncomfortable precision. You're American, he said. Not a question. The accent gives me away. Lena tried for light, casual, while everything in her screamed to maintain distance. Not entirely. You've learned to soften it, but there, he gestured vaguely. Certain words still carry Kentucky, yes? Her blood chilled. She'd worked for months to strip away the regional markers, the tells that located her too specifically. You have a good ear. I pay attention to what interests me. He sipped his espresso, watching her over the rim. How long have you been on the island? Long enough to know the best beaches. Deflection, keep it tourist-friendly. If you're looking for recommendations, I'm looking for conversation. Direct, unapologetic. When does your shift end? That's kind of you, but I'm not... Lena began the polite refusal she had delivered 100 times to men who thought a server's smile was invitation. Not what? He set down his cup with deliberate care. Not interested? Not available? Or not willing to trust a stranger who notices you're working despite being in pain? She froze. Her hand moved unconsciously toward her left hip, where old damage still flared on long shifts. I don't know what you're talking about. You favor your right side. Subtle, but consistent. The limp is worse when you're tired. His voice remained neutral, observational, rather than accusatory. You've been on your feet since, what, 11? Earlier? You arrived before your shift started. Are you watching me? The question came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with the fear she'd tried so hard to bury. Now I am. He leaned back, somehow making the casual posture look elegant rather than relaxed. Initially, I was just sitting in a restaurant, but yes, you have my complete attention now. Is that so terrible? It's creepy. Honest, he corrected, unfazed by her bluntness. Most people pretend not to notice things. I find that dishonest. You're interesting, and I don't pretend otherwise. You don't know me. That's what conversation is for, remedying ignorance. He glanced at his watch, expensive, understated in the way truly costly things often were. Your shift ends at 8. Have dinner with me. No. Immediate, reflexive. Because you don't find me attractive? Because you have other plans? Or because you're afraid? The questions came without judgment, like he was genuinely curious about her reasoning. All of the above, Lena said, aiming for firmness even as her pulse hammered. And I don't have dinner with customers. What if I wasn't a customer? What if I came back tomorrow, sat at a different restaurant, and asked you then? Then I'd still say no. Why? The sheer persistence should have been annoying. Instead, it felt like something else, like being seen after months of deliberate invisibility, like having someone refuse to accept the carefully constructed walls she'd built. Dangerous, intoxicating, absolutely off limits. Because men like you are complicated, she said quietly, and I came here for simple. Men like me. He repeated the phrase thoughtfully. What kind of man do you think I am, Lena? Her name in his mouth startled her. She was wearing a name tag, but somehow hearing him say it felt intimate. The kind who gets what he wants. Usually, he acknowledged this without arrogance, but not always, and not by force. If you say no, I'll respect that, but I'm asking you to say yes. Why me? The question escaped before she could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than she'd intended. There are dozens of women in Oya, tourists looking for vacation romance, locals who actually belong here. Why does it matter whether I have dinner with you? He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face with that same unsettling intensity. Because you're hiding, and I want to know what you're hiding from. The honesty hit like cold water. Lena's breath caught, her carefully maintained composure cracking. That's none of your business. Perhaps not, but I'm making it my business. He pulled out his wallet, extracted far too much money for coffee and octopus that hadn't arrived yet, and set it on the table. I'm staying at the Kanav's Oya Suites, room 17. If you change your mind about dinner, come find me. If not, he stood, and she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. I'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same table. Then he was gone, moving through the restaurant with that same predatory grace, leaving Lena standing beside the corner table with her heart racing and her mind spinning. Costa emerged from the kitchen with the octopus, took one look at her face, and frowned. I told you he was trouble. Yeah. Lena stared at the money on the table, at least 3 times what the bill would have been. You did. But trouble was a relative term, and the thing that terrified Lena most wasn't that the stranger had made her uncomfortable. It was that some treacherous part of her, some broken, foolish piece she thought she'd buried in Kentucky, wanted to see him again. True to his word, he returned the next day. Same time, same corner table, same deliberate choice of position over view. This time, Lena didn't try to pass him to Maria. She approached his table with coffee already prepared, espresso exactly as he'd ordered it before. You remembered. He accepted the cup, something like approval warming his expression. That's my job. Is it your job to remember every customer's order? The regulars, yes. I've been here once. That doesn't make me regular. You said you'd come back. I believed you. Lena set down the coffee with slightly more force than necessary. The octopus again? You decide. Order what you think I'll like. The same delegation of choice as yesterday. The same implication of trust. Lena wanted to find it presumptuous, but instead it felt like a test, one she was determined not to fail, despite not understanding the rules. She brought him grilled sea bass with lemon and herbs, served with island potatoes and fresh bread still warm from the oven. He ate slowly, deliberately, occasionally pausing to watch the other diners or check his phone with quick, efficient gestures. Lena tried not to watch him from across the terrace, tried to focus on her other tables, but her attention kept drifting back to the corner where he sat alone. How is everything? She asked when she cleared his plate. The question automatic. Perfect. Your instincts are excellent. He gestured to the empty chair across from him. Sit with me. I'm working. You're due for a break, I asked Costa. His smile was slight, knowing. He said you never take them, but you're entitled to 15 minutes. Sit, please. The please felt like an afterthought, but Lena found herself sliding into the chair anyway, her exhausted legs grateful for the respite even as her mind screamed warnings. Up close, she could see details she'd missed from a distance. A thin scar above his left eyebrow, the expensive watch that was actually a subtle tracking device if you knew what to look for, the slight calluses on his hands that suggested he did more than sign checks and make phone calls. What's your story, Lena Hart? He asked, his voice low enough that it wouldn't carry to nearby tables. And don't give me the tourist version, tell me something true. That's a very personal question for a stranger. Marco. He extended his hand across the table. Marco Valle. Now, we're not strangers. She didn't take his hand. Still a very personal question, Marco Valle. Then here, I'll go first. He withdrew his hand without apparent offense, folding his arms on the table. I'm from Rome originally. Family business brought me to Greece. I've been on Santorini for 3 weeks, and I'm phenomenally bored with everything except this restaurant. I prefer coffee to wine, sunrise to sunset, and I have an irrational dislike of crowds despite usually being surrounded by them. Your turn. The casual revelation felt choreographed, designed to lower her guard, invite reciprocation. Lena recognized the tactic because she'd used it herself, back when trust was a tool rather than a liability. I'm from Kentucky, she said finally. Obviously. I came here 6 months ago because I needed to be somewhere else. I work too much because I don't know what else to do with my time. And I don't trust easily, especially men who ask personal questions. Why not? Because trust is expensive. I can't afford it. Marco tilted his head, studying her with that uncomfortable focus. Someone hurt you. Someone always hurts everyone. That's not unique. No, but the way you carry it is. He reached across the table slowly, giving her time to pull back and touch the base of her wrist where her pulse hammered visibly. You're waiting for the next blow, anticipating pain. That's not just someone who got their heart broken. That's someone who got broken. Lena jerked her hand away, her chair scraping against stone as she stood. My break is over. Lena, thank you for dining with us, Mr. Vale. I hope you enjoy the rest of your stay in Santorini. She fled. There was no other word for it. Back into the kitchen where Costa was plating desserts with artistic precision. He looked up at her face and sighed. He's getting to you. No. The lie tasted bitter. He's just persistent. Men like that don't stop being persistent just because you want them to. Costa wiped his hands on his apron, his expression unusually serious. Be careful, Lena. Whatever you're running from, this island is small. Nowhere to hide if you need to run again. The warning settled in her stomach like lead. Costa was right. Santorini was barely 60 square miles of volcanic rock and tourist infrastructure. If she needed to disappear again, she'd already used up her best options. But when she emerged from the kitchen, Marco was still there, and the look he gave her was patient, determined, like he had all the time in the world to wait for her walls to crumble. He came back every day for a week. Same time, 3 in the afternoon, when the lunch rush had faded and the evening crowd hadn't yet arrived. Same table, corner position, back to the wall. Same routine. Coffee, whatever she recommended, conversation that felt like excavation. Each day he revealed something small about himself, offering fragments like a trail of breadcrumbs. He had a younger sister he worried about. He'd learned English from American movies. He'd once spent 3 months in Tokyo learning to make sushi from a master who'd initially refused to teach him. Why did he change his mind? Lena asked on the 5th day, drawn into the story despite herself. Because I kept showing up. Marco's smile was slight, self-aware. I'm stubborn. When I want something, I pursue it until I succeed or circumstances make continuation impossible. That's not stubbornness, that's obsession. Perhaps the line between persistence and obsession is mostly about outcome. If I'd succeeded, people would call it dedication. Since I'm still pursuing, he gestured at the space between them, you call it obsession. I call it unsettling. But you're still here. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. You're still bringing me coffee and sitting with me when Costa forces you to take breaks. You're still curious about why a man who could have dinner anywhere keeps coming back to this terrace. Maybe I feel sorry for you, alone in a foreign country, eating by yourself every day. I'm rarely alone, Lena. I choose to be alone here, with you. The distinction felt important, weighted with meaning she didn't want to examine. And I think you know the difference. She did. That was the problem. Everything about Marco suggested control over his environment, his presentation, his carefully measured revelations. The fact that he kept returning, kept pursuing conversation with the burned-out waitress who'd given him every reason to lose interest meant something, meant he'd chosen this specific pursuit for specific reasons she didn't understand. On the 7th day, he changed tactics. Come with me, he said after finishing the lamb she'd recommended, pushing back from the table. Where? Away from here, Your shift ends in an hour. I'll wait. Then I want to show you something. Marco, trust me. He stood, extending his hand in clear invitation. 1 hour. If you hate it, I'll bring you back and never ask again. If you don't, we'll renegotiate terms. Every survival instinct Lena had cultivated screamed at her to refuse. This was how it started. Small concessions, little compromises, until you looked up one day and realized you'd given away pieces of yourself you couldn't reclaim. She knew this pattern, had survived it once already, but she was so tired of being careful, so exhausted from 6 months of holding herself separate from everything, everyone, every possible connection that might require vulnerability. And Marco was offering something she'd almost forgotten existed: curiosity, adventure, the possibility that maybe she could have something beyond survival. 1 hour, she heard herself say. And you tell Costa where we're going. Deal. The hour passed in a blur of anxious anticipation. Lena finished her shift mechanically, her mind already racing ahead to what she'd agreed to. Costa cornered her near the kitchen. Are you sure about this? No. Honesty felt safer than false confidence. But I'm doing it anyway. Your funeral. But he squeezed her shoulder with rough affection. Call me if you need extraction. I know people. The idea that Costa, gentle, perpetually flower-dusted Costa, knew people capable of extraction would have been funny under other circumstances. Now, it just underscored how little she actually knew about anyone on this island, including herself. Marco was waiting outside when she emerged, changed from restaurant casual into dark jeans and a linen shirt that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A car idled at the curb, low, sleek, expensive enough that tourists were already taking pictures. You didn't mention a car. You didn't ask. He opened the passenger door, waiting. Still willing? Lena slid into leather seats that smelled like money and poor decisions. Where are we going? Somewhere you'll appreciate, I think. Marco navigated the narrow streets with practiced ease, heading away from Oya's tourist center toward the island's interior. How much of Santorini have you actually seen? The restaurant, my apartment, the pharmacy, the mini-mart. 6 months and that's it? He glanced at her, something like dismay crossing his features. Lena, you're living on one of the most beautiful islands in the world, and you've seen nothing? I didn't come here for tourism. What did you come here for? The question hung between them as the road climbed higher, leaving behind the white buildings and blue-domed churches that filled every postcard. Here the island showed its volcanic bones, red earth, rough stone, twisted vines clinging to terraced slopes. Distance, Lena said finally. I came here because it was far from where I'd been. Running from or running to? Does it matter? Yes. Marco's hand shifted on the wheel, his focus remaining steady on the winding road. Running from something means you're still connected to it. Running toward something means you're trying to build. I'm not building anything. I'm just existing. That's a waste. The bluntness stung more than anger would have. You don't know me well enough to make that judgment. Then let me know you better. That's what this is. He pulled off the main road onto a dirt track that looked like it led nowhere. Knowing you. The track ended at a cliff edge overlooking the sea. Marco killed the engine and sudden silence rushed in, just wind and waves and the distant cry of seabirds. He got out, came around to open her door like they were on a date, instead of whatever this actually was. This way. He led her along a narrow path that hugged the cliff, his hand occasionally steadying her when loose stones shifted underfoot. Lena tried not to notice how warm his palm felt against her lower back, how careful he was to match his pace to her limping gait. Finally, the path opened onto a hidden platform, natural stone worn smooth, overlooking nothing but sky and water stretching to infinity. How did you find this? Lena breathed, momentarily forgetting wariness in the face of devastating beauty. I asked a local where he'd proposed to someone he loved. He brought me here. Marco settled onto the sun-warmed stone, patting the space beside him. Said his wife cried for an hour when he asked her. Happy tears, he insisted. Lena sat, keeping careful distance between them. Are you planning to propose to someone? Not today. His smile was slight, amused. but I wanted to know where someone would come to do something important. Make a choice that mattered. The sunset was beginning, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold that seemed impossible, too saturated to be real. Lena watched colors bleed across the horizon and felt something shift in her chest, that old, dangerous hope trying to crack through protective ice. "Why did you really bring me here?" she asked quietly. Marco was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the water. When he finally spoke, his voice carried unusual weight. "Because I wanted you to see that you're allowed to have beautiful things. That hiding isn't the same as healing." "You don't know what I'm hiding from." "No, but I know what hiding looks like. I've done it differently, surrounded by people instead of isolated from them, but still hiding." He turned to face her, and his eyes held something raw, almost vulnerable. "I see you, Lena. Actually see you. Not the performance you give customers or the walls you've built. I see someone exhausted from carrying weight alone. Someone who deserves to put it down, even briefly. And if I don't want to put it down, if carrying it is what keeps me safe, then you carry it. I won't force you." His hand moved slowly, giving her time to pull away, and settled over hers where it rested on the stone. "But let me carry some of it with you, just while we're here, just for tonight." The touch was warm, solid, anchoring. Lena knew she should pull away, maintain the boundaries that had kept her functional, if not whole. But the sunset was impossibly beautiful, and Marco's hand felt impossibly steady, and she was so tired of being the only person holding herself together. So she didn't pull away. She let her fingers curl slightly, accepting the weight of his palm, the warmth of connection she'd denied herself for so long. It felt dangerous and necessary in equal measure. They sat in silence as the sun sank lower, painting the world in fire and shadow. And for the first time in 6 months, Lena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have this. Could have one evening of beauty and connection before returning to the careful isolation that kept her safe. She had no idea how much that one concession would cost her. Had no idea that the man holding her hand had orchestrated every moment, calculated every word, chosen her with the same precision he applied to everything else in his carefully controlled world. All she knew was that for one sunset, she didn't feel alone, and that would have to be enough. Even if some part of her already suspected it would never be enough again. The drive back to Oya happened in comfortable silence, the kind that felt earned rather than awkward. Lena watched the darkening landscape roll past, acutely aware of Marco's presence beside her, the quiet confidence in how he navigated the narrow roads, the occasional glance he sent her way when he thought she wasn't looking. She should have felt nervous, vulnerable after letting someone past her carefully constructed defenses, but instead she felt strangely calm, like she'd stepped off a cliff and discovered she could float. "Are you hungry?" Marco asked as they descended back toward the cluster of lights that marked the town. "Real food, not whatever you've been surviving on." "I eat fine." "You eat efficiently. That's different." He pulled into a parking area near the center of town, killing the engine. "When did you last have a meal you actually enjoyed instead of fuel you consumed?" Lena couldn't remember. Everything had been about function for so long, cheap groceries stretched across weeks, meals eaten standing in her tiny kitchen because sitting felt like wasting time. "I don't really think about it." "You should." Marco came around to open her door, extending his hand. "Come. I know a place." Another secret local spot? Something like that. The restaurant he led her to was tucked down a side street she'd walked past 100 times without noticing. No sign, no tourist-friendly menu posted outside, just a weathered blue door and the smell of grilled meat and herbs drifting from somewhere within. Marco knocked, actually knocked, like he needed permission to enter, and an older woman appeared, her face creasing into a warm smile when she saw him. They exchanged rapid Greek, the woman's gestures animated and affectionate. She patted Marco's cheek like he was a wayward grandson, then turned that same warm attention to Lena, switching effortlessly to accented English. "You bring me a beautiful girl, finally. I was thinking maybe you prefer boys, always coming here alone." Yeah, this is Lena. Lena, this is Elena. Yes, you share a name. She feeds me when I get tired of hotel food." The old woman, Elena, took Lena's hands in hers, studying her face with the kind of frank assessment that bypassed social pleasantries. Too thin and sad eyes, but good bones. We feed you, make you strong again. Before Lena could respond, Elena was ushering them inside to a small courtyard lit by strings of mismatched lights. A handful of tables occupied by what were clearly locals rather than tourists, the conversation flowing in Greek and cigarette smoke drifting toward the night sky. Elena seated them at a corner table. Of course, Marco would gravitate toward corners, and disappeared into the kitchen without taking their order. "Does she always decide what people eat?" Lena asked. "Always, and she's never wrong." Marco poured water from a clay pitcher, his movements relaxed in a way she hadn't seen before. Here, in this hidden courtyard with its local crowd and family atmosphere, he seemed different, less controlled, more human. "I found this place my second day on the island. Been coming back ever since." 3 weeks, you said. That's a long time for business." "Business takes as long as it takes." Something shifted in his expression, a brief shadow crossing his features before the practiced calm returned. "I'm patient when I need to be." Elena returned with plates of food Lena hadn't ordered: grilled lamb fragrant with rosemary, roasted vegetables glistening with olive oil, fresh bread and creamy tzatziki, small pastries that smelled of honey and nuts. It was too much food for 2 people, extravagant in its abundance. "Eat," Elena commanded, then muttered something in Greek that made Marco laugh. "What did she say?" "That you look like you need someone to take care of you, and that I better be that someone or she'll adopt you herself." Lena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I can take care of myself." "Of course you can. That's not the same as wanting to." Marco served her lamb with practiced ease, his attention focused on the task. "There's no weakness in accepting help, Lena," says the man who sits with his back to the wall and watches every entrance. His hand paused mid-motion, and when he looked up, something like respect warmed his dark eyes. "You noticed." "I noticed details, too." She accepted the plate, the smell making her stomach clench with sudden, fierce hunger. "You're careful, deliberate. Everything you do is calculated, including bringing me here. Does that bother you?" "I don't know yet." Lena took a bite of lamb, and the flavor exploded across her tongue. Rich, perfectly seasoned, so good it almost hurt. She closed her eyes, letting herself have this moment of pure sensory pleasure. "But I'm aware of it." They ate in companionable silence for a while, the courtyard's ambient noise, laughter, clinking glasses, rapid Greek conversations, creating a cocoon of normalcy around them. Elena returned periodically to refill their water, tisking at Lena's still full plate until she ate more. The old woman's maternal fussing should have felt intrusive, but instead it awakened something Lena had buried. The memory of being cared for, of mattering to someone beyond transactional relationship. "Tell me about your family," Marco said eventually, his tone casual but his gaze sharp. "Why?" "Because I want to know you. That includes where you came from." Lena set down her fork, the good food suddenly heavy in her stomach. "There's not much to tell. Small town, smaller opportunities. Parents who loved me but didn't understand me. I left as soon as I could." "And the limp? The way you flinch when men move too quickly?" The question was gentle but unrelenting. Lena's hands tightened in her lap, old fear sparking up her spine. "That's personal." "Everything interesting is personal." Marco leaned forward, and his voice dropped to that intimate register that felt like a physical touch. "I'm not asking you to relive trauma, Lena, but if we're going to know each other, really know each other, I need to understand what shaped you." "Why does it matter? I'm just a waitress you've been flirting with for a week." "You're not just anything, and this," he gestured between them, "isn't just flirting. You feel it too, or you wouldn't be here." He was right, and Lena hated that he was right. Whatever this was, it had weight, momentum, the kind of pull that felt inevitable even as every rational part of her brain screamed warnings. "His name was Derek," she heard herself say, the words scraping raw from a place she'd kept locked. "We met in Louisville. I was 23, working 3 jobs, trying to save enough to go back to school. He was older, established, seemed stable. I thought," she laughed bitterly, I thought he was what I needed. Security. Someone who had his life together. Marco said nothing, but his attention was absolute. Present. Waiting. It started small. Comments about my clothes, my friends, suggestions about how I could be better. I thought he was trying to help me improve. Lena stared at her hands, at the faint scars across her knuckles from that last desperate fight. By the time I realized it was control, I was so isolated I didn't know how to get out. And then, her voice cracked. Marco reached across the table, covering her hand with his, and the warmth steadied her enough to continue. Then he got physical, not all at once, just enough to remind me he could, that I needed him, that no one else would want damaged goods. The clinical recitation helped, made it feel like someone else's story. The limp is from when I finally tried to leave. He pushed me down concrete stairs, 3 fractures, soft tissue damage. The doctor said I was lucky it wasn't worse. How did you get away? My brother. He drove 12 hours straight when I called, showed up with a truck and 2 of his Marine buddies. Derek didn't try to stop us when there were 3 men who looked ready to kill him. Lena pulled her hand back, needing the separation. I stayed with my brother for a month, then I ran, saved every penny from settlement work and bought a one-way ticket to the furthest place I could afford. Ended up here. Does Derek know where you are? No, and I want to keep it that way. She met Marco's eyes, needing him to understand. That's why I don't do relationships, why I keep people at distance. I can't. I won't let someone have that kind of power over me again. Marco's expression had gone cold, his jaw tight with barely contained fury. But when he spoke, his voice remained carefully controlled. Thank you for trusting me with that. I know what it costs. Do you? Yes. He poured wine, when had Elena brought wine, and slid a glass toward her. My father was not a good man. Powerful, yes. Successful, certainly. But he confused control with love, possession with protection. I watched him destroy my mother slowly, methodically, under the guise of keeping her safe. She died when I was 17, and I promised myself I would never become him. The revelation hung between them, unexpected in its rawness. Lena studied Marco's face, seeing past the controlled exterior to something harder beneath. Did you keep that promise? I try. His smile was self-aware, edged with darkness. Every day I try. But his blood runs in my veins, and sometimes I feel his impulses. The need to control, to possess. I fight it, but it's there. That's honest. I won't lie to you, Lena, not about who I am or what I'm capable of. He raised his glass in a slight salute. You deserve honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. They drank, and Lena felt something shift between them. Not trust exactly. Trust would take time she wasn't sure she had to give. But understanding, recognition. 2 people who'd been shaped by violence and control, trying to navigate connection without repeating old patterns. Elena returned with dessert, baklava dripping honey, accompanied by small cups of strong coffee. She looked between them with knowing eyes, said something in Greek that made Marco shake his head, and disappeared again into the kitchen. What did she say this time? That we look at each other like people who've been lonely too long, and that I should stop being an idiot and kiss you before you remember you're supposed to be smart and leave. Lena's breath caught. Are you going to? Kiss you? Not tonight. Marco's eyes held hers, dark and intense. When I kiss you, Lena, it will be because you ask me to. Because you're absolutely certain you want my hands on you, my mouth on yours. I won't take that choice from you. The declaration should have felt patronizing, but instead it landed like a promise. Like he understood, really understood, what Derek had stolen and what she needed to reclaim. Agency, choice, the power to decide what happened to her own body. What if I never ask? Then I'll live with disappointment, but I won't push. He leaned back, breaking the intensity of the moment. I have patience, remember? I can wait. They finished dessert slowly, conversation drifting to safer topics. Books they'd read, places they wanted to visit, small details that built understanding without requiring vulnerability. By the time Elena shooed them out with wrapped leftovers and stern instructions to return soon, Lena felt wrung out and oddly peaceful, like she'd survived something difficult and come out intact. Marco drove her home through empty streets, pulling up outside the narrow building that housed her studio apartment. He made no move to get out, no assumption that the evening would continue. "Thank you," Lena said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. "For dinner, for listening, for not being him." Marco's voice was quiet. "That's a low bar, Lena." "Maybe, but it's where I'm starting. Then I'll meet you there." He reached across, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear with careful gentleness. "Sleep well. I'll see you tomorrow." It wasn't a question, but Lena found she didn't mind the presumption. "Same table?" "Always." She climbed out of the car, leftovers in hand, and watched him drive away before climbing the steep stairs to her apartment. The space felt smaller than usual, shabbier after an evening of beauty and good food and conversation that mattered. But it was hers, safe, controlled. Lena set the leftovers in her tiny refrigerator and caught sight of her reflection in the bathroom mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes brighter than they'd been in months. She looked almost alive. It terrified her. She'd come to Santorini to disappear, to exist in careful isolation until the damage Derek had done scarred over into something manageable. But Marco was making her visible again, drawing her out of protective numbness into feeling. And feeling meant risk, meant vulnerability, meant all the things she'd sworn to avoid. But as she lay in bed listening to the distant sound of the sea, Lena couldn't deny the truth. For the first time since leaving Kentucky, she wanted something beyond survival, wanted connection and conversation and the warmth of someone's hand steady over hers. She wanted Marco, and that want felt like the most dangerous thing she'd encountered yet. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a pattern that became its own kind of ritual. Marco appeared at the restaurant every afternoon, settling into his corner table with the ease of ownership. Lena served him, sat with him during breaks Costa increasingly insisted she take, and gradually led him into the careful fortress she'd built around herself. He took her to places tourists never saw. A tiny beach accessible only by a treacherous footpath, a vineyard run by an elderly couple who'd been making wine for 60 years, a monastery perched on a cliff where monks still kept bees and made candles the old way. Each destination felt chosen specifically for her, calculated to break through another layer of her defenses. And it was working. Lena found herself thinking about him during shifts, anticipating his arrival with something that felt dangerously close to excitement. She caught herself checking her reflection before he showed up, wearing the one dress she owned that wasn't stained with restaurant work. Small vanities she'd abandoned months ago suddenly mattered again. Costa noticed, of course. He cornered her one evening after Marco had left, his expression concerned. "You're falling for him." "I'm not." The denial came automatically, but even Lena heard the lie in it. "You are. And Lena, I like you. You're a good worker, a good person, but that man is not what he seems. None of us are what we seem." Lena wiped down tables with more force than necessary. "I'm being careful." "Are you?" "Because from where I'm standing, you look like someone walking into fire because it's warmer than being cold." The observation hit too close to truth. Lena stopped wiping, gripping the cloth tight. "What do you know about him?" "Nothing concrete, just instinct. The way other men look at him, like he's dangerous. The phone calls he takes outside, always in Italian, always tense. The fact that he's been here 3 weeks for business, but I've never seen him actually work." Costa's voice gentled. "I'm not saying he's a bad man, but I think he's a man with bad connections. And I don't want you caught in whatever web he's spinning. I can take care of myself." I know you can, but sometimes taking care of yourself means walking away before you're in too deep." Lena wanted to argue, to defend Marco and the careful way he'd approached her, the respect he'd shown. But Costa's warnings echoed doubts she'd been trying to ignore. Who was Marco really? What business kept him on a small Greek island for weeks? Why had he chosen her? A nobody waitress with nothing to offer except damage and distrust. That night, alone in her apartment, she did what she'd been avoiding. She pulled out her battered laptop and searched for him. Marco Vale, Rome, businessman. The results were sparse and carefully curated. A few photos from charity events, mentions in Italian business journals, a family name attached to import-export operations. Nothing specific enough to be revealing, nothing concrete enough to be damning. But the gaps told their own story. No social media presence, no personal details, no indication of what kind of business would bring him to Santorini. The digital footprint of someone who'd learned to stay invisible while operating in plain sight. Lena closed the laptop, her heart racing with familiar anxiety. She knew this feeling, the sense of missing pieces, of a picture not quite adding up. She'd ignored it with Derek, convinced herself she was being paranoid, let love, or what she'd thought was love, override instinct. She couldn't make that mistake again. The next afternoon, when Marco arrived at his usual time, Lena was ready. She'd spent the morning rehearsing what she'd say, building up her courage to ask the questions she'd been avoiding. "We need to talk," she said when she brought his coffee, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. Marco looked up, something shifting in his expression. "That sounds ominous." "Who are you really? Not the sanitized version you've been showing me." "The truth." He was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. Then he set down his cup with deliberate care. "Walk with me. Not here." "Marco, please, this conversation deserves privacy." Against her better judgment, Lena followed him out of the restaurant, down the winding streets toward the quieter edge of town. He led her to a small park overlooking the sea, empty in the afternoon heat. When he finally turned to face her, his expression was unreadable. "You looked me up." "Yes." "And found very little. Enough to know you're hiding something. Enough to wonder why a businessman from Rome spends weeks on a tourist island doing nothing visible." Lena crossed her arms, kneading the barrier. "So tell me, who are you?" Marco moved to the railing, staring out at the endless blue. "My family name is Vale. We've been in Rome for 4 generations, involved in various business interests. Import, export, real estate, construction. All legitimate, all properly documented. But legitimacy is complicated in Italy, especially when your family has been operating for nearly a century. Some of our early business partners were, let's say they had connections that would be problematic by modern standards." Lena's stomach dropped. "You're talking about the Mafia." "I'm talking about history, about the reality of doing business in post-war Italy, when the lines between legitimate enterprise and organized crime were deliberately blurred." He turned to face her, his expression grave. "My grandfather made choices I don't condone, built relationships with people I would never associate with. But he's dead, and I've spent the last decade cleaning up the mess he left." "That doesn't answer my question. Who are you now?" "Now? I'm a man trying to extract his family from obligations created before he was born. It's delicate work, dangerous work, the kind of thing that requires patience, careful negotiation, and time spent in places like Santorini meeting with people who can facilitate transitions." The explanation was smooth, practiced, just specific enough to feel truthful without revealing anything concrete. Lena wanted to believe him, but Costa's warnings echoed in her mind. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I wanted you to know me as Marco before you knew me as a Vale. Because the moment people hear my family name, they make assumptions. Judge me for my grandfather's sins." His voice carried real frustration. "I wanted you to see me, Lena. Just me." "But there is no just you. We're all the sum of where we come from, what shaped us." Lena moved closer, needing to see his eyes. "Are you dangerous?" "Yes." No hesitation, brutal honesty. "I'm capable of violence when necessary. I've hurt people who threatened what I'm trying to protect. I've made choices that keep me awake at night, but I've never hurt anyone who didn't deserve it, and I would never, never hurt you." "How do I know that?" Derek said the same things. That he'd never hurt me, that he only wanted to protect me. "Because Derek was a coward who hurt you to feel powerful. I don't need that. I have real power, the kind that doesn't require terrorizing someone weaker." Marco stepped closer, and Lena held her ground despite her instinct to retreat. "Ask me anything. I'll tell you the truth, even if it scares you away." "Are you in the Mafia?" "No. My family has historical connections, obligations I'm trying to dissolve, but I'm not a made man. I don't answer to anyone except myself." "Have you killed anyone?" His jaw tightened. "Yes. Twice. Both times defending myself or someone I cared about. Both times I had no other choice. Both times I reported it to authorities and faced legal scrutiny. Both times I was cleared. The clinical recitation should have terrified her. Instead, it felt honest in a way Derek's promises never had. Derek had lied with every breath, presented a false face while cultivating control. Marco was offering ugly truth, trusting her to handle it. "Why me?" Lena asked, the question she'd been carrying since that first afternoon. "Why pursue someone like me? You could have anyone." "Because you're real. You don't want anything from me except honesty and respect. You don't care about my name or my money or what I can provide." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face with gentle hands. "You see me, Lena. The good and the damaged and everything in between. That's rare, precious, worth pursuing. I'm not some prize to be won. No, you're a woman who's been through fire and came out stronger, who built a life from nothing in a foreign country, who chose survival when giving up would have been easier." His thumb brushed her cheekbone, the touch feather-light. "You're extraordinary, and I'm selfish enough to want you in my life." Lena's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. This was the moment, the point where she chose to trust or walk away. Every rational part of her brain screamed warnings, pointed to red flags and unanswered questions, and the sheer insanity of falling for someone with admitted violence in his past. But standing there with Marco's hands gentle on her face, his dark eyes holding nothing but raw honesty, Lena realized she'd already made her choice. Had made it that first sunset when she'd let him hold her hand. Had confirmed it through 2 weeks of careful courtship, of conversations that mattered, of being seen and valued for exactly who she was. "I'm terrified," she whispered. "Good. That means you're smart. If you weren't scared, I'd worry about your judgment. I don't know how to do this. Trust someone. Let them close. Then we'll learn together." Marco's smile was slight, almost vulnerable. "I don't know how to love someone without trying to control everything around them. We're both damaged, Lena. But maybe we can be damaged together and make something whole." She should say no. Should walk away while she still could, before attachment became dependency, before want became need. Should protect herself the way she'd learned to after Derek. Instead, Lena rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, answering the question he'd been waiting weeks for her to ask. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them hyper-aware of how breakable this moment was. Then Marco's hand slid into her hair, and Lena's fingers gripped his shirt, and suddenly nothing was gentle anymore. The kiss deepened, urgent and claiming, months of isolation and careful distance burning away in the space between heartbeats. Marco kissed like he did everything, controlled but passionate, deliberate but consuming. His hand stayed in her hair, holding her steady, while his mouth explored hers with devastating thoroughness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Lena felt like she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, had given something she couldn't take back. "Stay with me tonight," Marco said, his voice rough. "Not for sex, just stay. Let me hold you. Let me show you that closeness doesn't have to mean danger." Lena nodded, beyond words, and let him lead her back through the winding streets to the hotel where he'd been staying. The suite was everything she'd expected. Expensive, carefully appointed, with a terrace overlooking the caldera. But Marco ignored the luxury, pulling her directly to the bedroom where he kicked off his shoes and stretched out on the bed, arms open in clear invitation. "Come here." She went, settling against his chest with her head tucked under his chin, his arms wrapped around her, solid and warm and careful. They lay there as afternoon faded to evening, as the sky outside turned gold, then purple, then black. Marco's hands traced idle patterns on her back, soothing rather than arousing, and Lena felt herself relax muscle by muscle. "Tell me something true," she murmured against his chest. "I've been watching you for 3 months." Lena went still. "What?" "The first time I came to the restaurant wasn't chance. I'd seen you before, tracked you, learned your routines." His voice remained calm, factual. "I know this sounds wrong, but I need you to hear all of it. I saw you one morning at the market, struggling with groceries and limping, and I wanted to know your story. So I found out where you worked, what shifts you took, what you liked. Then I planned an approach that would feel organic instead of stalking." Horror and fury warred in Lena's chest. She pushed away from him, scrambling off the bed. "You stalked me. You admit to stalking me and you think I'll just, what, accept it? I think you deserve the truth, even when it makes me look terrible. Marco sat up but made no move to follow her. Yes, I pursued you deliberately. Yes, I orchestrated our meeting. But everything after that first day was real, Lena. The conversations, the connection, what I feel for you, all real. How am I supposed to believe anything you say now? You've been lying since the beginning. I never lied. I just didn't tell you how we started. His expression was grave, accepting her anger without deflecting. I won't apologize for being attracted to you or for wanting to know you, but I'm sorry for not being honest sooner. You deserved better. Lena pressed her hands to her face, trying to process what she'd just learned. 3 months. He'd been watching her for 3 months before that first afternoon in the restaurant, had seen her broken and struggling and decided she was worth pursuing like some kind of project. This is exactly what Derek did. Isolate me, control me, make me dependent. It's not. Marco's voice was sharp. Derek lied to trap you. I'm telling you the truth to free you. You can walk out right now, and I won't follow, won't contact you again if that's what you want. The choice is entirely yours. How is that a choice when you've already manipulated everything? Because manipulation would be continuing to hide it. Letting you believe we met by chance. Building a relationship on a foundation of deception. He stood slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. I'm giving you all the information. The good, the bad, the uncomfortable truth about how I became interested in you. Now you decide if that's something you can accept or a line you won't cross. Lena's mind raced, trying to separate legitimate concern from trauma response, real danger from echoes of past pain. Marco had stalked her. There was no gentle word for what he'd done. But he'd also approached her with respect, given her agency, been honest even when honesty made him look terrible. He was offering truth and choice, the two things Derek had stolen. I need to think, she said finally. Of course. Marco grabbed his wallet and keys. Stay here or leave. Your choice. The room is yours for the night either way. I'll find somewhere else to sleep. Where will you go? Wherever I need to be to give you space to decide. He paused at the door, his expression unreadable. For what it's worth, I know I don't deserve your trust, but I want to earn it, Lena, however long that takes. Then he was gone, leaving her alone in the expensive suite with her thoughts and fears and the memory of his hands gentle in her hair. Lena sank onto the bed, her entire body shaking with reaction. She should leave, should run back to her tiny apartment, pack her meager belongings, and find another island, another country, another place to hide. But as she sat there in the gathering dark, one truth crystallized through the chaos. Marco had scared her, yes, had crossed boundaries and admitted to behavior that would send most people running, but he'd also given her something Derek never had. Complete honesty about who he was and what he'd done. Had trusted her with ugly truths and accepted her anger without trying to minimize or justify. That had to mean something, had to count for something in the calculus of trust. Lena didn't sleep that night, but she didn't leave either. And when dawn broke over the caldera, painting the white buildings gold and pink, she finally knew what her answer would be. Marco returned to the suite just after sunrise, carrying coffee and pastries from a bakery Lena had never noticed despite walking past it daily. He looked exhausted, shadows under his eyes suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. When he saw her still there, curled in the chair by the window, watching dawn paint the caldera, something like relief flooded his features. You stayed. His voice was rough, uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. I stayed. Lena accepted the coffee he offered, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. But we need ground rules if this is going to work. Anything. No more secrets. I don't care how ugly the truth is, I need to know it. I can handle honesty. I can't handle being blindsided again. She met his eyes, needing him to understand how serious she was. And no more watching me without my knowledge. If you want to know something about me, ask. Don't spy. Agreed. Completely. Marco settled on the edge of the bed, maintaining distance. What else? I need space sometimes. When I say I need to be alone, you have to respect that without questioning my commitment or making it about you. This had been Derek's favorite manipulation. turning her need for breathing room into evidence that she didn't love him enough. My independence isn't a threat to us. Understood. I'll fight the impulse to fix or control, but I need you to call me on it when I slip. I'm not always aware when I'm being possessive. His honesty was disarming. What else? Lena took a breath, gathering courage for the hardest requirement. I need you to tell me about your business. The real business. Not sanitized versions. I need to know what you're actually involved in, who you're meeting with, what risks exist. If I'm going to be part of your life, I need complete transparency about what that means. Marco was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded slowly. That's fair. And dangerous for you, but fair. Knowledge makes you a target, Lena. Are you sure you want that burden? I'm sure I can't be with someone whose life is a mystery. Derek kept me in the dark, used ignorance as a control mechanism. I won't do that again. She set down her coffee, her hands steadier than they'd been all night. So yes, I want the burden. I want the truth. Then you'll have it. Marco scrubbed a hand over his face, and Lena could see him making some internal decision. But not here. Not in Santorini. If we're going to have this conversation properly, you need to see my world. Understand it completely. What are you suggesting? Come to Rome with me. Meet my sister. See where I live. Understand the context of what I'm trying to do. A week. That's all I'm asking. If after a week you decide this life isn't something you want, I'll bring you back and we'll end things cleanly. The proposal was insane. She'd known him barely a month, had only learned yesterday that he'd been stalking her for months before that. Flying to Italy with him was exactly the kind of reckless choice that led to disaster. But it was also the only way to know for certain what she was getting into. Lena had learned the hard way that distance and mystery bred danger. If Marco was willing to show her his real life, family, business, all of it, that meant something. Meant he was serious about transparency, even when it cost him. 1 week, she said finally. But I'm buying my own return ticket, and I tell Costa where I'm going and check in daily. Non-negotiable. A smile ghosted across Marco's face, tired but genuine. You're smart to demand safety measures. I'll give you all my contact information, my sister's number, my home address. Anything that makes you feel secure. When would we leave? Tomorrow, if you can arrange it. I've delayed business too long already. He hesitated, something vulnerable flickering in his expression. I know this is fast, Lena. I know I'm asking a lot. But I need you to understand my life if we're going to build something real. Half-truths and careful distance won't work long-term. He was right. As terrifying as the prospect was, staying in Santorini meant staying in limbo, building a relationship on sand while avoiding the foundation underneath. If she was going to do this, she had to do it completely. Eyes open, risks acknowledged, truth faced head-on. I'll talk to Dimitri today. Request a week off. The decision settled in her chest, solid despite the fear. But Marco, if I see anything that reminds me of Derek, anything that suggests you're trying to control or manipulate me, I'm gone. No second chances. Fair. He stood, moving toward her with careful deliberation. Can I hold you, or do you need more space? The question itself was answer enough. Derek had never asked, never given her the choice. Lena rose and stepped into Marco's arms, letting his warmth surround her. They stood like that for long minutes, breathing together, and Lena felt some of the night's tension drain away. Thank you for staying, Marco murmured against her hair. I know what it cost you to take that risk. Thank you for telling me the truth, even knowing it might drive me away. They spent the rest of the day together, the air between them different now, weighted with both confession and commitment. Marco took her to lunch at Elena's courtyard restaurant, where the old woman beamed at them and piled their plates with enough food for 4 people. She said something rapid in Greek that made Marco laugh and Lena blush. She says you look less sad today, like someone finally convinced you it's safe to be happy. I'm not sure about happy, but maybe less afraid. Lena picked at the moussaka, her appetite returning after a sleepless night. Tell me about your sister. What's she like? Marco's entire demeanor softened at the mention. Isabella is 26, stubborn as hell, and smarter than I'll ever be. She's finishing her doctorate in art history, specializing in Renaissance forgeries. She has absolutely no patience for the family business and makes that clear at every opportunity. She doesn't know what you do? She knows the sanitized version, that I'm cleaning up grandfather's messes, extracting us from old obligations. She doesn't know specifics. I've kept her separate from anything dangerous. His expression tightened with old worry. She's the one pure thing in my life, Lena. The one person who exists completely outside the ugliness. Does she know about me? I told her I met someone. She's been demanding details for 2 weeks, threatening to fly to Santorini and investigate herself if I didn't produce you. Affection warmed his voice. She's going to interrogate you mercilessly. Fair warning. The idea of meeting Marco's sister should have terrified Lena. Instead, it felt oddly reassuring, evidence that he had family who cared about him, connections that humanized him beyond the controlled exterior he presented to the world. They walked through Oya afterward, Marco pointing out details she'd never noticed despite months on the island. The best place for sunset viewing, the shop that sold actual local pottery instead of mass-produced tourist trash, the tiny chapel where his business contact had gotten married the previous summer. He was showing her his Santorini, the island he'd come to know while pursuing her, and Lena felt herself softening further toward him. That evening, she made the call to Dmitri that would change everything. Her boss was surprisingly understanding about the sudden request for time off, his Greek-accented English warm with paternal concern. You go. Have adventure. Life is too short to work all the time. Then his tone sharpened slightly. But Lena, be careful. Men like your Marco, they are complicated. Beautiful, yes, but complicated. I know. I'm going in with eyes open. Good girl. You call if you need anything. Costa has friends everywhere, even Rome. The casual mention of Costa's mysterious connections made Lena smile despite her nerves. Apparently, everyone on this island had hidden depths and unexpected resources. Packing her meager belongings took less than an hour. 6 months in Santorini had taught her to live light, to keep possessions minimal and escape routes clear. She stood in her tiny apartment afterward, looking at the space that had been her refuge, and felt a pang of something like grief. This was the end of hiding, the end of careful isolation. Whatever happened in Rome would determine whether she could have a real life again or needed to run further. Marco picked her up before dawn, the streets of Oya still silent and shadowed. His car navigated the narrow roads with practiced ease, heading toward the small airport on the island's other side. Lena watched her adopted home disappear in the rearview mirror and tried not to think of it as goodbye. The flight to Rome was mercifully short, though Lena spent most of it gripping the armrest and trying not to catastrophize. Marco seemed to sense her anxiety, covering her white-knuckled hand with his own and maintaining a steady stream of quiet conversation that required minimal response. He talked about Rome's architecture, his favorite restaurants, the park where he ran most mornings, small details that painted a picture of his daily life. When they landed at Fiumicino, Lena's first impression of Rome was chaos, crowds and noise and rapid Italian flowing around her like water. Marco guided her through customs with easy confidence, his hand steady at her lower back, and Lena tried not to feel overwhelmed by how far she was from anything familiar. A car waited for them outside, sleek and black with tinted windows. The driver greeted Marco in rapid Italian, took their bags, and held the door with the kind of deference that spoke to long employment. Lena slid into leather seats that smelled expensive and tried to process that this was normal for Marco. Drivers and luxury and being treated like someone important. Nervous? Marco asked as the car merged into Rome's infamous traffic. Terrified, Lena admitted. Your world is very different from a restaurant in Santorini. My apartment is different. My life is different. But I'm the same man who sat at table 7 every afternoon and ate whatever you recommended. He squeezed her hand gently. Try to see past the trappings, Lena. The rest is just set decoration. Easier said than done. Rome unfolded outside the windows, ancient ruins butting against modern buildings, scooters weaving through traffic with suicidal confidence, gorgeous architecture everywhere she looked. The driver navigated it all with casual expertise, eventually pulling up outside a beautiful old building in what Marco said was Trastevere. I thought we'd go to your place first, Lena said, confused. This is my place. I own the top 2 floors. Marco helped her out of the car, grabbing their bags before the driver could. Isabella has the 3rd floor. She insisted on being close enough to interfere in my life regularly. The building's exterior was all old-world charm, aged stone and wooden shutters, flower boxes overflowing with blooms. Inside was equally beautiful, with soaring ceilings and original tilework that had to be centuries old. But it was the woman waiting in the foyer who captured Lena's attention. Isabella Vale was stunning, dark hair falling in waves past her shoulders, her brother's same espresso-colored eyes, dressed in casual elegance that probably cost more than Lena made in 3 months. She took one look at Lena and broke into a brilliant smile. Finally! Marco has been absurdly secretive, which meant you had to be either imaginary or too good for him. Her English was perfect, touched with British boarding school precision. I'm Isabella. Come, let me look at you properly. She crossed the foyer and took Lena's hand, studying her with frank curiosity that was somehow disarming rather than intrusive. You're prettier than he described, and you have kind eyes. That's important. Marco tends to attract sharks. Bella, you're scaring her. Marco's voice carried exasperation and affection in equal measure. Nonsense. If she scares easily, you chose wrong. Isabella linked her arm through Lena's, already steering her toward the stairs. I'm stealing your girlfriend for proper coffee and interrogation. You can brood upstairs and unpack. Lena? Marco's question was really asking permission, checking that she was comfortable being separated. I'm good. And surprisingly, she was. Isabella's direct warmth was easier to handle than Marco's intensity, and getting his sister's perspective felt important. I'll see you later. Isabella's apartment was smaller than what Lena assumed Marco's would be, but infinitely more lived in. Books everywhere, art prints covering the walls, a desk buried under research materials. The younger woman guided Lena to a cozy kitchen and began making espresso with the kind of ritualistic precision that suggested this was serious business. So, Isabella said as she worked, my brother is in love with you. He hasn't said so explicitly, but I know him. He doesn't bring women home, doesn't introduce them to family. The fact that you're here means you matter. So I need to know, what are your intentions toward my idiot brother? The directness caught Lena off guard, pulling a surprised laugh from her. Shouldn't I be asking you that question? Probably. But you're the one who flew to a foreign country with a man you've known barely a month. Either you're reckless or he's worth the risk. I'm trying to determine which. Maybe both. Lena accepted the tiny cup of espresso, inhaling the rich aroma. I don't know what I'm doing, honestly. A month ago, I was just trying to survive. Now I'm in Rome with a man who admitted to stalking me, hoping to understand what I'm actually getting into. Isabella's eyebrows rose. He told you about that? About watching you for months? Last night, almost sent me running. But you're here anyway. Isabella settled across from her, dark eyes assessing. Why? Because he told me the truth, even knowing it might drive me away. That takes a kind of courage Derek never had. Derek being the man who hurt you. It wasn't a question. Clearly, Marco had shared at least some of Lena's history. Marco told me a little. Enough to know you've been through something terrible. Lena took a careful sip of espresso, using the pause to gather her thoughts. Your brother scares me sometimes, not because I think he'll hurt me, but because caring about him means entering a world I don't understand. He promised me truth, showed me his reality. I'm here to see if I can handle it. Honest, I like that. Isabella's smile was approving. Marco needs someone who won't be dazzled by money or intimidated by power, someone who sees him as human rather than myth. What's he really involved in, Isabella? I know the basic outline, family business, old obligations, extracting himself from grandfather's connections. But what does that actually mean? The younger woman's expression became more guarded. You should ask him. It's not my story to tell. I'm asking you because I want perspective beyond what he'll share. I need to know if I'm being naive. If the danger is worse than he's admitting. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with loyalty and concern. Finally, she sighed. Our grandfather was a complicated man, brilliant businessman, terrible human being. He built the family fortune through a combination of legitimate enterprise and deeply problematic partnerships. By the time Marco inherited control, We were entangled with people who don't simply let you walk away. What kind of people? The kind who view obligation as permanent, who expect loyalty to be absolute. Isabella's voice was careful, measured. Marco has spent 5 years trying to extract us, paying off debts, severing connections, building legitimate operations that don't require dirty partnerships. It's dangerous work. People have died. Lena's stomach dropped. People Marco killed? People who came after him, who saw his attempts at extraction as betrayal and tried to make examples. Isabella met her eyes directly. My brother is not a violent man by nature, Lena, but he is a protective one. When threatened, he responds with absolute force. Is he in danger now? Are you? Less than we were. The work he's been doing in Greece is part of the final extraction, negotiating with people who can facilitate clean breaks from old partnerships. If it succeeds, we're free. If it fails, she left the sentence unfinished, but the implication was clear. Lena processed this information, trying to square it with the man who'd courted her so carefully over afternoon coffee. Why me, Isabella? Why pursue someone like me when he could choose someone from his world? Someone who understands this life? Because women from his world want what he can provide: money, status, connections. You wanted nothing from him, just honesty and respect. Isabella's smile turned sad. Do you know how rare that is? How exhausting it is to never know if someone loves you or what you represent. I'm not sure I love him. I barely know him. But you could. I see it in how you talk about him, wary but wanting, scared but still here. Isabella reached across and squeezed Lena's hand. Just be patient with him. He's learning how to be with someone without controlling everything. It goes against every instinct our family cultivated. They talked for another hour, Isabella sharing stories about growing up as a Vale, the pressure and privilege intertwined. She painted a picture of Marco as a devoted older brother, taking responsibility for the family's problems so she could have a normal life. The love between them was evident, as was Isabella's worry that her brother's protective instincts would eventually destroy him. When Lena finally made her way upstairs to Marco's apartment, she was emotionally wrung out but clear about what she'd walked into. Marco met her at the door, his expression anxious. Did Bella terrify you completely? No, she gave me context, perspective. Lena stepped inside, taking in the space that would be home for the next week. It was beautiful, high ceilings, original details carefully preserved, furniture that managed to be both elegant and comfortable. But what struck her most were the books. Everywhere, in multiple languages, on every conceivable subject. You didn't mention you were a reader. There's a lot we don't know about each other yet. Marco closed the door, maintaining careful distance. What did Isabella tell you? That your grandfather was dangerous, that you've been cleaning up his mess for 5 years, that people have died. Lena turned to face him fully. That if your work in Greece fails, you're both in serious danger. Marco's jaw tightened. She shouldn't have told you that. I asked. She was honest, which is what I need from both of you. Lena moved closer, studying his face. How much danger, Marco? Really? He was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much truth to share. Then he seemed to come to a decision. Enough that I have security I didn't mention. Enough that this building has protections you wouldn't notice but that exist. Enough that bringing you here was a calculated risk. Risk to me or to you? Both. You're visible now, associated with me. That makes you vulnerable. His voice roughened with what sounded like regret. I should have considered that more carefully before pursuing you. Should have protected you by staying away. But you didn't stay away. No, I'm too selfish for that. He reached out, cupping her face with gentle hands. I saw you struggling with groceries, trying so hard to be invisible, and I wanted to give you everything: safety, comfort, the freedom to be seen without fear. It was possessive and probably unhealthy, but I couldn't walk away. Show me. Lena covered his hands with hers, holding them against her face. Show me your world, your work, everything you've been trying to protect Isabella from. I need to understand completely before I can decide if this is something I can handle. Marco's eyes searched hers, looking for certainty or perhaps permission. Knowing makes you complicit, Lena. Makes you part of it. Are you sure? I'm sure I can't be with someone whose life is a mystery. Show me. He led her through the apartment to a study she'd initially missed. A beautiful room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a massive desk facing windows that overlooked the Roman rooftops. Marco opened a drawer, withdrew a folder, and set it on the desk with careful deliberation. These are the families my grandfather partnered with, the obligations he created that I've been dissolving. He opened the folder, revealing photographs and documents. Some I've successfully separated from. Others are proving more difficult. Lena studied the photographs. Men in expensive suits, some clearly taken at social events, others surveillance-style shots. They all had the same quality Marco did: controlled, dangerous, comfortable with power. How do you separate from people like this? Carefully. You find what they value more than your continued obligation: money, connections, opportunities they can't access otherwise. You offer trades, make yourself more valuable as an ally than an asset. His finger traced one photograph, a silver-haired man with cold eyes. This is Antonio Marchesi. He's the last significant connection I need to sever. My work in Santorini was negotiating with his rivals, building leverage I can use to force a clean break. And if he refuses? Then things become complicated. Marco's voice was flat, emotionless. Marchesi is old school. He views obligations as permanent, betrayal as unforgivable. If he decides I'm a threat rather than a useful connection, he'll move against me. Against us, you mean? If I'm visible, associated with you, boss? Yes, against us. Marco closed the folder, his expression grim. This is why I hesitated to pursue you, Lena. Why even now part of me says I should send you back to Santorini and end this before you're in deeper. Being with me means accepting risk, real danger, not abstract possibility. Lena's mind raced, trying to process the magnitude of what he was sharing. This wasn't the sanitized version he'd given her on the terrace in Santorini. This was real. Concrete danger from people who solved problems with violence. She should be terrified. Should be running for the door. Instead, she felt strangely calm. Informed fear was manageable in a way vague dread never was. At least now she knew what she was facing. What happens next? With Marchesi? With your extraction? I have a meeting tomorrow night. Final negotiation with someone who can provide leverage Marchesi can't refuse. Marco hesitated, then continued. I want you to come with me. Not to the meeting itself. You'll wait somewhere safe with security. But I need you to see this part of my life. Understand what I do and how I operate. Why? Why not keep me separate like you did with Isabella? Because you asked for complete transparency, and because he pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, because if we're going to build something real, you need to see all of me, even the parts I'm not proud of. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs, but she nodded. Okay, show me. They spent the rest of the day in strange domesticity, Marco cooking dinner in a kitchen that was clearly well used despite his wealth, Lena curled on the couch reading while he worked at his desk, comfortable silence settling between them. It felt surreal, this glimpse of what normal could look like with him. But underneath the calm surface, tension hummed. Tomorrow night she would see him in action, would understand what he actually did when he negotiated with dangerous men. That night, they shared his bed platonically again, Marco's arms wrapped around her while she processed everything she'd learned. His breathing eventually evened into sleep, but Lena stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering if she was brave or simply foolish. She'd come to Rome seeking truth. Now she had it, dangerous, complicated, utterly overwhelming truth. The question was whether she could handle it, or if knowing would prove more terrifying than ignorance had ever been. The next evening arrived too quickly. Marco dressed in dark, expensive clothes that transformed him from the man who'd courted her over coffee into something harder, more dangerous. Lena watched him check a gun, actually seeing him armed sent ice through her veins, and tuck it into a holster beneath his jacket. You don't have to come, Walt, he said, catching her expression. Yes, I do. Lena smoothed her dress. Isabella had insisted on lending her something appropriate, beautiful, and clearly expensive. I asked for this. The drive across Rome was tense and silent. Marco's driver navigated with the same ease as before, But now Lena noticed the second car following them, the way the driver constantly scanned their surroundings. Security measures she'd missed before, now glaringly obvious. They stopped at an upscale restaurant, the kind with discreet entrances and tables spaced for private conversation. Marco helped her out, his hand steady at her back, and spoke quietly to someone Lena hadn't noticed, a man in a dark suit who'd materialized from the shadows. "This is Paolo. He'll stay with you in the private dining room upstairs. If anything goes wrong, he'll get you out." Marco's voice was steady, but his eyes were worried. "I shouldn't be more than an hour. What do I do if something happens to you?" "Paolo has instructions. He'll take you to Isabella, who has additional instructions. You'll be safe regardless of what happens to me." He cupped her face, pressing a brief, fierce kiss to her forehead. "But nothing will happen. This is just negotiation." Negotiation that required armed security and evacuation plans. Lena wanted to argue, to demand he not go into whatever danger waited downstairs. But this was his life, his work. She'd asked to see it, had demanded transparency. Paolo guided her upstairs to a private room with a view of the restaurant below. She could see Marco descending to a corner table. Of course he'd choose the corner, where two men already waited. One was older, distinguished, the other younger and harder looking. Marco greeted them with the kind of controlled courtesy that suggested high stakes and careful maneuvering. "Who are they?" Lena asked Paolo, who'd taken position by the door. "Business associates." "Better you don't know more." His English was accented but clear, his attention focused on the scene below. Lena watched Marco settle into negotiation, his body language confident but not aggressive. She couldn't hear the conversation, could only observe gestures and expressions. The older man seemed skeptical, the younger one openly hostile. Marco remained calm, saying something that made the older man laugh and the younger one scowl. The meeting stretched past an hour, past two. Lena's anxiety ratcheted higher with each passing minute. Then suddenly the older man stood, extending his hand. Marco shook it, the gesture formal and binding. Whatever had been negotiated, they'd reached agreement. Relief flooded through Lena so intensely her knees went weak. Paolo smiled slightly, apparently reading the same signals. "Good meeting. Vale is very skilled at this." Marco appeared upstairs 10 minutes later, some of the tension gone from his shoulders. He crossed immediately to Lena, pulling her into a tight embrace. "It's done. Marchese will agree to terms. We're free." The words were muffled against her hair, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. 5 years of work, and we're finally free. Lena held him, feeling the slight tremor in his frame that suggested how much control he'd been exerting. "What did you offer him?" "Access to shipping routes his organization needs, connections with Greek partners that are more valuable than our continued obligation, and a substantial cash payment that makes severing ties profitable rather than insulting." Marco pulled back, his hands framing her face. He agreed. It's over. The drive home was jubilant, Marco's careful control cracking to reveal genuine happiness. He held her hand the entire way, occasionally raising her knuckles to his lips in absent affection. When they reached the apartment, Isabella was waiting, and the siblings embraced with uncharacteristic emotional display. "We're really free?" Isabella's voice was thick with tears. "Completely?" "Completely. The contracts will be signed next week, but Marchese's word is binding. It's done, Bella. You're safe." They celebrated with expensive wine and takeout from Isabella's favorite restaurant. The three of them sprawled in Marco's living room, talking and laughing. Watching the siblings together, seeing Marco relaxed and genuinely happy, Lena felt something shift in her chest. This was what freedom looked like for them. Not wealth or luxury, but the simple ability to live without constant threat. Later, after Isabella had gone downstairs and they were alone, Marco pulled Lena into his lap, his arms wrapped securely around her. "Thank you for being here, for seeing that and not running." His voice was quiet, intimate. "I know it was frightening." "It was. But I understand now. Why you're the way you are, why control matters so much to you." Lena turned to face him more fully. "You've been responsible for your sister's safety since you were barely an adult. That's enormous pressure. It shaped everything. Every choice. Every calculated risk." His thumb traced her cheekbone gently. "Including pursuing you. I saw someone strong who'd survived trauma, and I wanted that strength in my life. Wanted to protect it, nurture it. Probably wanted to control it too, if I'm being honest. Probably, Lena agreed softly. But you're trying not to. That matters. They kissed then, slow and deep, weeks of tension finally finding release. Marco's hands stayed gentle despite the intensity, always giving her space to pull back, to say no. The consideration, the constant awareness of her autonomy melted something in Lena's carefully protected heart. I'm falling for you, she whispered against his mouth. I don't want to. It's terrifying, but I am. Good, because I fell for you months ago, watching you struggle with groceries and refusing to give up. His smile was soft, almost vulnerable. You're extraordinary, Lena Hart, and I'm not letting you go easily. For the first time in months, maybe years, Lena felt herself truly relax into someone else's arms, felt safe enough to be vulnerable, to admit wanting, to imagine a future beyond survival. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure, this feeling of being seen and chosen and fought for. She had no idea how fragile that safety really was, or how quickly everything would shatter. The illusion of safety lasted exactly 3 days. Lena spent those days exploring Rome with Marco as her guide, falling deeper into the rhythm of his life. They wandered through the Forum at sunrise before the tourist crowds arrived, Marco explaining the history with the kind of detail that suggested he'd studied it extensively. They ate at tiny trattorias, Isabella recommended, drank wine on his terrace while watching the sun set over ancient rooftops, and talked about futures that suddenly felt possible. Marco was different here in his own city. More relaxed, more himself, the careful control he'd maintained in Santorini softening into something warmer. Isabella joined them often, her sharp wit and genuine affection for Lena making the younger woman feel welcomed rather than scrutinized. They spent an afternoon at Isabella's university, Lena listening while she explained her research on Renaissance art forgeries with infectious enthusiasm. Watching the siblings together, seeing how Marco's entire demeanor shifted around his sister, protective but proud, worried but trusting, Lena understood him better. Everything he'd done, every dangerous choice, had been about keeping Isabella safe enough to have this normal life. On the third night, Marco took Lena to a small jazz club tucked down an alley she never would have found alone. The music was intimate and sultry, the crowd sophisticated in that effortless Roman way. They sat close in a corner booth, Marco's preference for tactical positioning apparently eternal, and he kept his arm around her shoulders, occasionally pressing kisses to her temple between songs. I could get used to this, Lena murmured, relaxed by wine and music and the solid warmth of Marco's body against hers. Good, because I'm planning to make it permanent if you'll let me. His voice was low, meant only for her. I know it's fast. I know we're still learning each other. But I want you in my life, Lena. Here in Rome or back in Santorini or anywhere else you want to be, I'm not letting you go. The declaration should have triggered her flight response, should have reminded her of Derek's possessive proclamations. But Marco's tone wasn't possessive. It was hopeful, asking rather than demanding, offering rather than claiming. I want that too, she said, surprising herself with how much she meant it. I'm still scared sometimes, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. But I want to try. Marco pulled her closer, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted like wine and promise. Around them the music swelled, and for a moment everything felt perfect. Possible. Like maybe she really could have this, love and safety, and a future with someone who saw her completely. Then Marco's phone buzzed. He ignored it initially, but it buzzed again. And again. His expression shifted, tension returning to his shoulders as he checked the screen. Whatever he saw there drained the color from his face. We need to go. Now. He was already standing, pulling cash from his wallet and throwing it on the table. Don't ask questions, just stay close to me. Lena's heart kicked into overdrive, old fear flooding her system. She let Marco guide her through the club, his hand firm at her back, moving with controlled urgency that suggested real danger. Outside, his driver was already waiting, engine running, and another car had materialized behind them. Security that had been invisible before now, obvious and ready. What's happening? Lena asked as Marco pushed her into the car, sliding in beside her. Marchese changed his mind. Or someone changed it for him. Marco's voice was tight, controlled fury barely leashed. There's been an incident. Isabella, we need to get to Isabella. The drive across Rome was terrifying. The driver navigating traffic with aggressive speed while Marco made rapid calls in Italian. Lena caught enough words to understand. Isabella, university, danger, now. Her stomach twisted with sick fear. The younger woman had become a friend over these few days, someone Lena genuinely cared about beyond her connection to Marco. They screeched to a stop outside a beautiful old building Lena recognized from their earlier visit, Isabella's university. Marco was out before the car fully stopped, and Lena scrambled after him, ignoring his barked order to stay in the vehicle. She wasn't letting him face whatever this was alone. Inside, chaos. Campus security clustered near the entrance, police arriving with sirens blaring. Marco pushed through them with the kind of authority that suggested he'd dealt with situations like this before, Lena close on his heels. They found Isabella in a conference room with 2 police officers, her face pale but her posture defiant. "I'm fine," she said immediately when Marco burst in. "Marco, I'm fine. They didn't touch me." "Who didn't touch you?" Marco's hands were shaking as he pulled his sister into a fierce hug. "What happened?" "2 men followed me from the library. I noticed and went somewhere public called security. They left before anyone could stop them, but—" Isabella pulled away, meeting her brother's eyes steadily. "They wanted me to know they were there. One of them said to tell you the deal was off." Marco's expression went absolutely cold, rage so tightly controlled it was terrifying. "Did they hurt you? Touch you at all?" "No, just scared me." Made their point. Isabella's voice wavered slightly, betraying the fear she was trying to hide. "What's happening? You said we were free." "We were supposed to be." Marco turned to the police officers, switching to rapid Italian. The conversation was tense, his gestures sharp with barely contained violence. Finally, he turned back to his sister, his voice carefully controlled. "You're coming home with me, tonight, and you're not going anywhere alone until this is resolved." "Marco, I have classes, research, I don't care. Your safety is more important than your doctorate." The steel in his voice allowed no argument. "This is not negotiable, Bella." Isabella looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Marco's expression stopped her. She nodded, gathering her things with shaking hands. Lena moved to help, earning a grateful look from the younger woman. The drive back to Trastevere was silent and tense. Marco sat rigid beside Lena, his jaw clenched so tight she worried he'd crack teeth. His hand found hers in the darkness, gripping with enough force to hurt, and Lena squeezed back, trying to offer comfort she wasn't sure how to give. At the apartment, Marco stationed security in the building. Men Lena hadn't seen before materialized with frightening efficiency. He settled Isabella in his guest room, checking windows and locks with paranoid thoroughness before finally, reluctantly, leaving her to rest. When he returned to the living room where Lena waited, the careful control finally cracked. Marco crossed to the bar and poured whiskey with shaking hands, downing it in one swallow before pouring another. "I'm sorry you had to see that." His voice was rough, raw. "I thought we were past this. Thought I'd finally gotten us clear." "What does this mean?" The men following Isabella, the message. "It means Marchese was pressured to renege. Someone convinced him our deal wasn't in his best interest." Marco's laugh was bitter. "Or someone paid him more to keep us obligated. Either way, we're back to square one, except now they've made Isabella a visible target." "Can you negotiate again? Offer more?" "There's nothing more to offer. I gave him everything I had." Marco set down his glass with enough force to crack it. "They don't want money or connections anymore, Lena. They want control. Want to remind me that obligations are permanent, that I don't get to walk away just because I've decided I'm done." Lena watched him pace, seeing the careful composure she'd come to associate with Marco disintegrate into something rawer. This was what he'd been protecting Isabella from. Not just physical danger, but this crushing weight of responsibility, the impossible burden of keeping someone safe in a world where safety was never guaranteed. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to." Marco stopped pacing, turning to face her. "I need to handle this, Lena, and I need you somewhere safe while I do." "You're sending me away." Not a question. She could hear it in his voice, see it in the way he was already putting distance between them. I'm protecting you. There's a difference. He crossed to her, his hands gentle despite the tension radiating from him. These people have made Isabella a target to get to me. If they know about you, and they will know about you, they'll use you the same way. I can't let that happen. So what, you just ship me back to Santorini and handle this alone? Anger sparked through Lena's fear. That's not protecting me, Marco. That's shutting me out. It's keeping you alive. Don't you understand? These aren't people who make empty threats. They hurt the people I care about to control me. I won't give them that weapon. I'm not a weapon. I'm a person who cares about you and wants to help. Lena stood, closing the distance between them. You promised me transparency, partnership. Now the second things get difficult, you're reverting to the same controlling behavior you swore you were fighting. This is different. It's not. You're making decisions for me instead of with me, deciding what I can handle, what risks I'm allowed to take. Her voice shook, but she pushed forward. I asked you not to do this, Marco. I told you my independence wasn't a threat to us. Your independence doesn't matter if you're dead. The words came out harsh, desperate. I can't protect you and fight them simultaneously. I need you somewhere safe so I can focus on ending this without worrying you'll be collateral damage. Then teach me to protect myself. Give me tools, resources, whatever I need, but don't send me away like I'm a problem to be solved. Lena grabbed his arms, forcing him to look at her. I'm not Isabella. I'm not some innocent you need to shield from reality. I've survived violence before. I can handle this. You shouldn't have to. Marco's voice cracked, and suddenly he wasn't the controlled businessman anymore, but just a man terrified of losing someone he loved. I brought you into this. My choices, my past, my inability to fully extract us from my grandfather's poison. You should be safe in Santorini, living a quiet life, not caught in my mess. But I'm not in Santorini. I'm here with you by choice. Lena softened her voice, seeing past his anger to the fear underneath. I know you're scared. I know you want to protect everyone you care about, but you can't do that by pushing us away. I don't know how else to do this. The admission cost him. She could see it in the way his shoulders slumped. Every instinct I have says to lock you and Bella in a fortress until I've eliminated every threat. I know that's wrong. Know it's the same controlling behavior my father used, but I don't know how to keep you safe without controlling everything. Lena pulled him down to sit beside her, keeping his hands clasped in hers. You start by talking to me, telling me what you're planning, what the risks are, what I need to know. You give me information and let me make informed choices instead of making them for me. Marco was quiet for a long moment, clearly warring with himself. Finally, he nodded slowly. Marchese was pressured by someone higher up the chain, someone who wants to keep the Vale family obligated because we're useful. I need to find out who and convince them we're more valuable as allies than assets. How do you do that? Carefully. I have contacts who can help, people positioned to gather information without exposing themselves. Once I know who's pulling strings, I can negotiate directly. His jaw tightened. Or eliminate them if negotiation fails. The casual mention of elimination, of killing, should have horrified Lena. Instead, she found herself analyzing it practically. What's the timeline? How long until you have answers? Days, maybe. A week at most. Marco studied her face, looking for judgment or fear. You're really okay with this? With what I might have to do? I'm okay with you doing what's necessary to protect your family. I'm not okay with being shut out of the process. Lena squeezed his hands. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to do what you need to do. I'm going to stay here with Isabella. Safety in numbers, right? We'll have security. We'll be careful. And you'll check in regularly so I know you're alive. Deal? You're terrifying when you're decisive. But Marco's smile was real, some of the tension easing from his features. Are you sure? I can arrange for you to be somewhere truly safe, somewhere they'd never think to look. I'm sure. Besides, Isabella needs someone with her who isn't going to treat her like fragile glass. She's scared, Marco. She needs a friend, not just a guard. The observation seemed to hit home. Marco glanced toward the guest room where his sister was presumably trying to sleep. his expression anguished. I failed her. I promised to keep her safe, to give her a normal life, and now she's a target because of me. You haven't failed anyone. You've protected her for years, given her opportunities most people never have. This setback doesn't erase everything you've done. Lena cupped his face, making him look at her. But you need to let her be part of the solution instead of just something to protect. She's strong, Marco. Trust that. They sat together in the quiet apartment, Marco's head eventually coming to rest on Lena's shoulder while she ran her fingers through his hair. Outside, Rome continued its eternal rhythm, traffic and voices and life, carrying on despite the small drama unfolding in one apartment. Lena felt the weight of what she'd committed to settling on her shoulders. She'd inserted herself into a dangerous situation. Chosen to stay when running would have been smarter. But looking at Marco's exhausted face, feeling the way he'd finally let himself be vulnerable with her, she knew she'd made the right choice. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. That had to count for something. The next morning brought harsh reality. Marco was up before dawn, already dressed and armed when Lena stumbled into the kitchen seeking coffee. He'd transformed back into the controlled businessman, every trace of last night's vulnerability buried beneath professional competence. I have meetings today. Security will stay with you and Bella. Don't go anywhere without them. He poured her coffee with automatic precision. Paolo is in charge. He has instructions to get you both out of Rome if anything seems wrong. Where are you going? To gather information, call in favors, start mapping who's behind Marchese's reversal. Marco set the coffee in front of her, his expression unreadable. I'll be back tonight. Maybe late, but I'll be back. Be careful. Lena caught his hand before he could pull away. I mean it. Don't take unnecessary risks. Define necessary. His smile was slight, dark. Everything's a risk at this point. He left before she could respond, and Lena heard the security detail moving into position outside. She'd committed to staying, to being part of this, but the reality of armed guards and dangerous meetings made it feel suddenly very real. Isabella emerged an hour later, looking exhausted but determined. She'd clearly been crying. Her eyes were red-rimmed and puffy, but her voice was steady when she spoke. Marco left already? Early meeting. He said we're supposed to stay put with security. Lena poured coffee for Isabella, noting how the younger woman's hands shook slightly as she accepted it. How are you doing? Furious, terrified, guilty. Isabella slumped into a chair, her usual polished composure absent. Marco has been trying to extract us for years. He's sacrificed everything, relationships, opportunities, his own happiness, to keep me safe. And now I'm the weak point they're using against him. You're not a weak point. You're his motivation. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, I'm the reason he can't walk away. The leverage they use to keep him obligated. Bitter tears tracked down Isabella's face. Maybe I should leave. Disappear somewhere they can't find me. Remove myself from the equation. And break Marco's heart in the process? Make him think he failed to protect you? Lena moved to sit beside her, taking the younger woman's hand. That's not the answer, Isabella. Running doesn't solve this. What does? We can't negotiate with people who view us as property, can't fight them without becoming what we're trying to escape. Isabella's voice cracked. I just want my brother to be free, to have a life that isn't defined by our grandfather's sins. They sat together in the quiet kitchen, two women caught in a situation neither had created, but both had to survive. Lena found herself thinking about patterns, how Derek had isolated her, controlled her, made her feel like a burden, how different this was, and yet how some dynamics remained the same. The key was choosing to be part of the solution instead of accepting the role of victim. Tell me about your research, Lena said finally. You were so excited about it the other day. Tell me what you're working on. Isabella looked surprised by the subject change, but slowly began talking about Renaissance forgeries, about how she was developing techniques to identify fakes that had fooled experts for centuries. As she talked, animation returned to her face, passion replacing fear. Lena listened and asked questions, and gradually the morning became less about danger and more about two friends sharing coffee and conversation. The day stretched endlessly. Security rotated in shifts, Silent men who moved through the apartment checking windows and monitoring feeds from cameras Lena hadn't known existed. Paulo brought lunch from a nearby restaurant, testing it himself before allowing them to eat, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid days ago, but now felt grimly necessary. Marco called once, his voice clipped and distracted. "I'm making progress. Don't wait up. I'll probably be late. Be safe. Always." The line went dead before Lena could say more. Evening came with no further word. Lena and Isabella made dinner together, simple pasta and salad, and ate mostly in silence, both women watching the clock and trying not to imagine worst-case scenarios. At 10, Isabella finally gave up and went to bed. Lena stayed up, curled on the couch with a book she couldn't focus on, waiting. Marco finally returned just after midnight, looking exhausted and grim. He went straight to check on Isabella, confirming she was safely asleep, before joining Lena in the living room. "Tell me." Lena set aside her unread book, making room for him on the couch. "It's worse than I thought. Marchesi was pressured by the Calabrian syndicate. They want veil connections to expand into Northern Europe. We're useful because we're established, legitimate on paper, with access to shipping routes and business relationships they can't easily duplicate." Marco scrubbed his hands over his face. "They're not going to let us go without extracting significant value first. Can you give them what they want? Not without becoming exactly what I've been trying to escape. They want years of cooperation, ongoing obligation, participation in operations I won't touch." His voice was flat with exhaustion. "I've spent the last 12 hours exploring every angle. There's no negotiation that ends cleanly." "Then what's the alternative?" Marco was quiet for a long moment, and when he looked at her, Lena saw something cold and resolved in his expression. "I eliminate the person making the demand. Remove them from the equation. Someone else takes over, someone I can negotiate with, or who has different priorities. The syndicate fractures, loses coordination, and I slip free in the chaos." "You're talking about assassination." Lena kept her voice level despite the ice forming in her stomach. "I'm talking about survival. About protecting my sister and you and any chance we have at normal lives." Marco's jaw tightened. "I know what that makes me. No, it crosses lines I swore I wouldn't cross. But I'm out of options, Lena. This is the only path I see." Lena's mind raced, trying to process what he was proposing. This wasn't self-defense or protecting someone in immediate danger. This was calculated killing, premeditated murder to solve a problem. Everything she'd been taught, every moral framework she'd built her life around, said this was wrong, unforgivable. But looking at Marco's exhausted face, thinking about Isabella crying in the kitchen that morning, remembering the casual violence of men following a young woman to send a message, Lena found her moral certainty wavering. Sometimes there were no good choices. Sometimes survival required becoming something you'd rather not be. "If you do this, there's no going back," she said quietly. "You'll have crossed a line. Become the thing you've been trying to escape." "I know." Marco's voice carried the weight of that knowledge. "But if it keeps Bella safe, keeps you safe, I'll carry that burden. I'll become whatever I need to be." "What do you need from me?" The question seemed to surprise him. "Understanding, maybe. Or forgiveness. I don't know." "You have both." Lena took his hands, holding tight. "But Marco, promise me this is the last time. That once this is done, we're truly free. No more obligations, no more violence. We walk away and never look back. I promise. This ends it, one way or another." He pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her with desperate intensity. "I'm sorry you're part of this. Sorry I brought you into my mess. I chose this, chose you." Lena pressed her face against his neck, breathing in his familiar scent. "Whatever happens next, we face it together. That was the deal." They held each other in the quiet apartment while Rome slept around them, two damaged people trying to build something whole from broken pieces. Lena knew she should be horrified by what Marco was planning, should be running for the nearest exit. Instead, she felt strangely calm, resolved. She'd survived Derek by learning to recognize real danger versus perceived threat. Marco wasn't Derek. He was a man pushed into impossible choices, trying to protect the people he loved the only way he knew how. She could live with that, could live with him, darkness and all. The question was whether either of them would survive what came next. The next 3 days existed in a strange suspension between normalcy and nightmare. Marco left early each morning and returned late each night, his expression growing progressively grimmer as whatever plan he was formulating took shape. He wouldn't share details, protecting them through ignorance, he claimed, but Lena could see the weight of it crushing him incrementally. The careful control he'd always maintained was fracturing under pressure, revealing the man underneath who was terrified of failing the people he loved. Lena and Isabella developed their own rhythm during those endless days. They cooked together, read on the terrace, talked about everything except the danger hovering over them. Isabella shared stories about growing up Vale, the privilege and pressure intertwined, the constant awareness that their family name carried history they hadn't chosen. Lena talked about Kentucky, about Derek, about the long journey from broken to functional. They became friends in the way people do when facing crisis together, bonded by shared fear and stubborn hope. On the fourth morning, Marco didn't leave. Instead, he emerged from his study where he'd been closeted since dawn and called them both to the living room. His face was haggard, exhausted, but something in his eyes suggested resolution. Decision made, consequences accepted. "It's happening tonight," he said without preamble. "I need you both to know the plan in case things go wrong." Isabella's face went pale. "Marco, what are you doing?" "What I have to." He pulled out his phone, displaying a photograph of a distinguished-looking man in his 60s. "This is Lorenzo Conti. He's the one who pressured Marchesi, who's been blocking our extraction. He'll be at a charity event tonight at the Palazzo Farnese. I've arranged to meet him privately to discuss terms." "And then you're going to kill him." Lena's voice was flat, stating fact rather than asking. "If negotiation fails, yes, I've explored every other option. This is what's left." Marco's jaw was tight, his hands clenched. "Paolo and the security team will stay with you. If I'm not back by midnight, Paolo has instructions to get you both out of Italy. New identities, new lives, everything arranged." "Absolutely not." Isabella stood, fury animating her features. "You're not doing this alone, Marco. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me again." "Bella, no, listen to me." She crossed to her brother, gripping his arms with surprising strength. "I know you think you're protecting me. That's all you've ever done, and I love you for it. But I'm not a child anymore. I'm not something fragile you need to shield. I'm a grown woman who refuses to let you become a murderer on my behalf." "It's already done. The decision is made." Marco's voice was gentle but implacable. "I need you safe, Bella. That's all that matters." "What about what I need? I need my brother alive and whole, not dead or destroyed by guilt." Tears streamed down Isabella's face. "There has to be another way. Something we haven't considered." "There isn't. I've looked at this from every angle. Conti won't negotiate in good faith. He sees us as assets to exploit. The only way to break his hold is to remove him entirely." Lena watched the siblings face off, seeing the love and desperation on both sides. Isabella was right. Marco was preparing to destroy himself to save her. But Marco was also right that conventional solutions had been exhausted. They were trapped in an impossible situation with no clean exits, unless they changed the game entirely. "What if there was a third option?" Lena heard herself say. Both Vales turned to look at her, and she forced herself to continue despite having no idea where this was going. "What if instead of killing Conti or accepting his terms, we made him irrelevant?" "How?" Marco's tone was skeptical but interested. "You said he wants Vale connections because you're legitimate, established, have access and relationships he can't easily duplicate. What if those things weren't true anymore? What if the Vale family business suddenly became worthless to him?" "You're suggesting we destroy our own operations? Lena, that's generations of work. That's been a prison for you both." Lena stood, moving to face them. "You've spent 5 years trying to extract yourselves while maintaining what your grandfather built. But what if you didn't maintain it? What if you deliberately burned it down, made yourselves useless to people like Conti?" Isabella's eyes widened with understanding. "We liquidate everything. Sell off assets, dissolve partnerships, distribute the money in ways that can't be easily traced or recovered. We become financially comfortable private citizens instead of a criminal family's useful tool." You'd both lose everything you've built. Marco looked between them, clearly wrestling with the idea. The business, the reputation, the power that comes with the Vale name. We'd lose chains, Isabella corrected. We'd lose the weight of grandfather's sins. We'd lose the target on our backs. Her voice strengthened with conviction. Marco, when have we ever wanted this? The business, the obligations, any of it? You've been maintaining it because you thought you had to. But what if you didn't? Marco sank onto the couch, his mind visibly racing through implications. It would take time, weeks, maybe months to properly liquidate, and Conti wouldn't wait patiently while we dismantled everything. Then we do it fast and messy, sell to competitors at a loss, gift properties to charities, create legal tangles that would take years to unwind. Lena was gaining momentum, seeing the shape of a plan. We make the Vale business so fractured and complicated that no one could effectively use it, including you. The family would lose millions in value. But we'd be free. Isabella knelt in front of her brother, taking his hands. Really free, Marco. Not just extracted from current obligations, but completely separate from the entire world grandfather built. Isn't that worth any amount of money? Lena watched Marco wrestle with the decision, seeing hope and fear war across his features. This was a man who'd spent his entire adult life maintaining control, protecting assets, playing the long game. What they were proposing was the opposite, controlled demolition of everything he'd been fighting to preserve. If we do this, there's no going back, he said finally. The Vale name becomes meaningless. Our family legacy disappears. We become nobody. We become free, Isabella repeated. We become people instead of assets. Marco looked at Lena, something desperate and hopeful in his eyes. What do you think? Really? I think you've been trying to escape a burning building while saving the furniture. Sometimes you just need to get out alive and let it burn. Lena moved to sit beside him, taking his hand. You'll have enough money to be comfortable. You'll have your sister safe. You'll have a chance at actual life instead of this constant survival. Isn't that what you wanted? He was quiet for a long moment, and Lena could almost see him letting go, of control, of legacy, of the weight he'd been carrying since he was barely an adult. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough but certain. Okay, we do it. We burn it all down and walk away. The next hours were chaos of a different kind. Marco made calls to lawyers, accountants, business partners, setting in motion the deliberate destruction of Vale Enterprises. Isabella worked her own contacts, finding charities and institutions that could absorb sudden property transfers. Lena coordinated with Paolo, ensuring security stayed tight while the financial demolition proceeded. By noon, Marco had sold controlling interest in the shipping company to a Greek competitor for half its market value. By 3, Isabella had transferred 2 properties to the university with stipulations that made them legally unusable for criminal enterprise. By 6, the family's import business was being carved up and distributed to 3 different parties with competing interests and incompatible operational styles. Conti is going to be furious, Marco said, watching another asset sale finalize on his laptop. This destroys any value we had to him. Good. Let him be furious with people who have nothing left to take. Isabella was almost giddy with destructive momentum. I just donated grandfather's entire art collection to the National Museum. Do you know how angry that would have made him? I'm gleeful. Despite the tension, Lena found herself smiling at Isabella's vindictive joy. The younger woman had spent her entire life under the shadow of their grandfather's empire. Watching her actively dismantle it felt like liberation. Marco's phone rang just after 7. He glanced at the screen, his expression hardening. It's Conti. Answer it, Lena said. Let him know what we've done. Marco put the phone on speaker, his voice carefully neutral when he answered. Conti. What are you doing, Vale? The man's voice was cultured but furious. I'm watching your family's assets get carved apart like a Christmas turkey. Explain yourself. I'm extracting my family from the business, as I've been trying to do for 5 years. You blocked conventional methods, so I'm using unconventional ones. Marco's tone was almost pleasant. By tomorrow, there will be no Vale business worth controlling. We'll be comfortably retired private citizens with no operations, no connections, and nothing you could possibly want from us. You're destroying millions in value. I'm buying freedom. Turns out it costs exactly that much. Marco glanced at Lena, and she saw something like wonder in his eyes. The deal is simple, Conti. Leave us alone, and what's left of the liquidation can proceed in somewhat orderly fashion. Continue to threaten my family, and I'll burn every remaining asset so messily it'll take you years to extract any value. Your choice. You arrogant bastard! You think you can just walk away after everything your family owes? My grandfather owed. I've been paying his debts for 5 years. Now I'm done. Sue me if you want. Courts move slowly, and by the time any judgment comes through, there won't be anything left to claim. Marco's voice hardened. But if you or anyone working for you comes near my sister or Lena again, the gloves come off. I still have resources, Conti, still have connections, and I'm very motivated to protect the people I love. Silence on the line, tense and crackling. Then Conti laughed, bitter and sharp. You're crazy. Destroying everything for what? For women? For some fantasy of normal life? For freedom. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? You've spent so long accumulating power, you've forgotten what it's like to just be human. Marco's voice softened slightly. I feel sorry for you, actually. This must be incomprehensible. You'll regret this. Maybe. But it'll be my regret, my choice. That's worth any amount of money. Marco ended the call without waiting for response, setting the phone down with careful deliberation. The three of them sat in silence for a moment, the weight of what they'd done settling around them. Then Isabella started laughing, real, genuine, slightly hysterical laughter that broke the tension like shattering glass. We actually did it. We burned down grandfather's empire in one afternoon. We really did. Marco pulled his sister into a fierce hug, and Lena saw tears tracking down his face. We're free, Bella. Actually free. Lena watched them hold each other, these two people who'd carried impossible weight for so long finally able to set it down. She felt her own eyes burning with tears. Not from fear or grief, but from witnessing something rare and precious. People choosing love over power, freedom over legacy, each other over everything else. Marco reached out, pulling Lena into the embrace, and they stood together in the middle of his expensive apartment surrounded by the wreckage of liquidation paperwork. Outside, Rome continued its eternal rhythm, completely unaware that one family had just rewritten their destiny. The charity event at Palazzo Farnese happened without Marco's attendance. Instead, he spent the evening with Lena and Isabella, drinking expensive wine and making plans for futures that suddenly felt possible. Isabella talked about finishing her doctorate without the weight of family obligation, maybe traveling to study collections she'd only read about. Marco suggested Santorini, maybe buying a small restaurant, living somewhere beautiful and simple. Lena listened and contributed and felt herself daring to imagine permanence, belonging, home. What do you want, Lena? Isabella asked. You've been facilitating our dreams all evening. What's yours? Lena looked at Marco, at the man who'd pursued her so relentlessly, who'd shown her that being seen didn't always mean being hurt. I want to build something. Not run from the past, but create a future. Maybe go back to school like I always planned. Study something that matters to me. The liquidation is leaving us comfortable but not wealthy, Marco said carefully. But there's enough for you to do whatever you want. School, travel, starting a business, whatever would make you happy. I don't need your money, Marco. I know, but I want to give you choices. Freedom to pursue what matters without financial pressure. He took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. You gave me the idea that saved us. Showed me that sometimes the only way to win is to stop playing the game entirely. Let me give you something back. What I want is you, the real you, without the armor and control and constant vigilance. Lena squeezed his hand, the man who sits at corner tables because he likes watching the world, who reads philosophy in 3 languages, who loves his sister enough to destroy everything for her safety. That's what I want. Marco's expression cracked, vulnerability flooding through. That man is terrified he doesn't deserve you. That bringing you into his life puts you in danger for selfish reasons. That man saved himself and his sister today. That man chose freedom over power. That man is exactly who I want. Lena leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. We're both damaged, both survivors, but maybe we can build something whole together. They kissed while Isabella made exaggerated gagging noises, then dissolved into laughter that felt like release. The evening stretched late, conversation flowing easily now that the weight of crisis had lifted. Around midnight, Isabella finally retreated to her apartment downstairs, hugging them both with fierce affection. "Thank you," she whispered to Lena, "for seeing the solution we couldn't, for giving my brother permission to let go. Thank you for trusting me, for welcoming me into your family despite everything." After Isabella left, Marco and Lena stood on his terrace watching Rome sleep below them. The ancient city glowed golden under streetlights, beautiful and eternal, and completely indifferent to their small drama. "What happens now?" Lena asked. "Now we figure out who we are without the weight of legacy defining us." Marco wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "I'm thinking we should go back to Santorini, at least for a while. Let things settle here. Make sure Conti honors the implicit truce. And then? Then we live. Actually live, instead of just surviving." His arms tightened slightly. "I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to learn what makes you happy and spend my days providing it. I want to be boringly normal and domestically content." "That sounds perfect." Lena turned in his arms, looking up at his face. "But Marco, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise you won't try to control everything, that you'll let me have agency, make my own choices, even when they scare you." Her voice was serious, needing him to understand. "I love you, but I won't be with someone who tries to own me through protection. I promise to try, to catch myself when I'm being controlling and course correct." His smile was self-aware. "I'll probably fail sometimes. Old habits are hard to break. But I swear I'll keep trying, keep fighting those instincts. That's all I ask, effort and honesty." They stayed on the terrace until dawn began painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, talking about futures and plans, and the terrifying, exhilarating prospect of building lives without the scripts they'd been following. When they finally went inside, it was to Marco's bedroom where they made love with the desperate tenderness of people who'd nearly lost each other, who understood how fragile happiness could be. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Lena felt something settle in her chest that she'd thought Derek had destroyed forever. Safety. Not the kind that came from hiding or running, but the kind built on trust and honesty and mutual choice. Marco wasn't perfect. He was controlling and occasionally obsessive and carried darkness she'd only glimpsed. But he was trying, learning, choosing her happiness over his comfort. That was enough, more than enough. The next weeks unfolded in organized chaos. Lawyers finalized the dissolution of Vale Enterprises. Accountants distributed funds. Properties changed hands with dizzying speed. Marco coordinated it all with the same meticulous attention he'd once applied to maintaining the business, now focused on destroying it thoroughly. True to his word, Conti made no further moves. The syndicate had apparently decided that pursuing Vale assets wasn't worth the legal tangles and public scrutiny that would come with fighting the liquidation. Isabella threw herself into finishing her doctorate with renewed energy, no longer carrying the weight of family obligation. She started seeing someone, a professor at the university who made her laugh and knew nothing about her family's history. Watching her blossom without the shadow of grandfather's empire was revelation for Marco, proof that his choice had been right. 2 months after the liquidation began, Marco and Lena returned to Santorini. They flew commercial this time, no private cars or security detail, just 2 people with modest luggage starting over. Costa met them at the restaurant with crushing hugs and knowing looks. "You did something crazy, didn't you? Something that scared you both but worked out." "How did you know?" Lena asked, laughing. "Because you both look lighter, like you put down weight you'd been carrying too long." Costa's smile was warm. "Also because I have friends who tell me things. Word travels that Marco Val destroyed his family business and walked away. Apparently my reputation preceded me." Marco didn't seem bothered by this. "I'm hoping to build a new one, something quieter." "Good. Loud gets you killed on islands. Quiet lets you live." Costa turned to Lena. "Your job is still available if you want it, but something tells me you have other plans." "I'm going back to school. Online courses for now, maybe in person later. I want to study psychology, help people who've been through what I survived." The decision had crystallized during her time in Rome, watching Marco and Isabella navigate trauma and healing. But I'd love to work a few shifts a week, if you'll have me. Always. They settled into a rhythm that felt sustainable rather than survival-focused. Marco bought a small property outside Oya. Nothing ostentatious, just a house with good bones and a view of the sea. He spent his days reading, learning to cook properly, occasionally consulting for former business contacts who needed expertise, but not commitment. Lena worked part-time at the restaurant, took her courses seriously, and slowly built toward the future she'd abandoned when Derek had nearly destroyed her. They fought sometimes, Marco's controlling tendencies surfacing when Lena took risks he deemed unnecessary. Lena's fierce independence clashing with his protective instincts, but they'd learned to recognize the patterns, to call each other out and course correct before damage became permanent. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, honest, built on choice rather than necessity. 6 months after returning to Santorini, Marco proposed, not with fanfare or elaborate planning, but on the hidden platform he'd first brought her to, watching sunset paint the sky impossible colors. The ring was simple, no ostentatious diamond, just a band with small stones that caught the light. I know it's fast by normal standards. I know we're still learning each other, still figuring out how to be together without falling into old patterns. Marco held the ring, but didn't immediately offer it. But I also know I want to spend my life with you, learning you, loving you, building something neither of us could have alone. So, Lena Hart, will you marry me? Lena looked at the ring, at Marco's anxious face, at the sunset stretching endlessly before them. She thought about Derek, about Santorini's bleached simplicity, about Rome and dissolution and choosing freedom over everything else. Thought about who she'd been 6 months ago, broken and hiding, versus who she was now, still damaged, still carrying scars, but no longer defined by them. Yes, she said, and meant it completely. But I have conditions. Marco laughed, relief and love mixing in his expression. Of course you do. We do premarital counseling. I want us to work with someone who can help us navigate our damage productively. And we keep communicating, keep being honest even when it's uncomfortable. And you promise to catch yourself when you're being controlling, and I promise to tell you when I need space instead of just shutting down. Deal. Anything else? Isabella has to approve. I'm not marrying into a family that doesn't want me. She already does. She's been asking when I was going to stop being an idiot and propose. Marco slipped the ring onto Lena's finger, his hands gentle despite their trembling. She actually helped me pick this. Said you'd want something meaningful instead of flashy. She knows me well. Lena looked at the ring catching sunset light, at Marco's face open and vulnerable in a way it rarely was. I love you. I'm terrified of loving you, but I do. I love you too. Have since I watched you struggle with groceries and refused to let anyone help. He pulled her close, and they kissed as the sun sank below the horizon. Thank you for seeing me, for not running when you learned who I really was. Thank you for showing me it's safe to be seen, that not everyone who notices you wants to hurt you. They stayed on the platform until stars emerged, talking about futures and weddings, and whether Isabella would insist on planning everything herself. Eventually, they made their way back to Marco's car, to the house they were building together, to the life they'd chosen over safety and legacy and all the scripts they'd been handed. The wedding happened 3 months later, small, intimate, just family and close friends. Isabella served as maid of honor and cried through the entire ceremony. Costa walked Lena down the aisle since her family remained distant, complicated, not yet ready to be part of her new life. They married on the terrace of the restaurant where they'd met, sunset painting everything golden, promises exchanged with the sea as witness. Afterward, there was dancing and food and laughter that felt earned rather than obligatory. Marco held Lena close during their first dance, whispering promises against her hair that no one else could hear. She felt his arms around her, still protective, still possessive, but learning to hold without controlling, and knew she'd made the right choice. They honeymooned in Greece, island hopping with no agenda beyond exploration and each other. Lena watched Marco relax incrementally, the careful control he'd maintained for so long finally dissolving into something softer. He laughed more, worried less, Let himself be present instead of constantly scanning for threats. She caught him sometimes just watching her with wonder, like he couldn't quite believe she was real. "What are you thinking?" she asked one evening, stretched out on a beach while sunset painted the sky. "That I'm happy. Actually, completely happy." Marco's voice carried surprise at the realization. "I spent so long fighting, protecting, surviving. I forgot what it felt like to just be content." "Me too." Lena rolled to face him, sand sticking to her skin. "Derek made me think happiness was something other people had, that I was too damaged, too broken, but you showed me that wasn't true. We showed each other. You taught me that loving someone doesn't mean controlling them, that protection and possession aren't the same thing." He traced her face with gentle fingers. "I'm still learning, still catching myself when old instincts surface, but I'm trying. That's all that matters, the trying." They returned to Santorini eventually, to the house and life they were building. Lena finished her degree online and began working toward certification as a trauma counselor, using her own experience to help others navigate recovery. Marco consulted occasionally, but mostly focused on being present, for Lena, for Isabella, who visited regularly, for the life they were creating deliberately instead of by default. 2 years after the wedding, Lena woke to find Marco already awake beside her, watching her with that same expression of wonder he'd worn since their honeymoon. "Why are you staring at me?" she mumbled, still half asleep. "Because you're here. Because you stayed." His voice was quiet, reverent. "Because 2 years ago I was planning to kill a man to protect my sister, and now I'm lying in bed with my wife, planning what to make for breakfast. The contrast is stunning." Lena reached out, tracing the faint scar above his eyebrow. "Do you regret it? Destroying the business, walking away from everything?" "Not even slightly. I regret the years I wasted maintaining something I never wanted. But destroying it, choosing you and Bella and freedom, best decision I ever made." He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. "Though I still have nightmares sometimes. That Conti comes back, that I wasn't thorough enough, that something I missed will hurt you. We all have nightmares. I still dream about Derek sometimes, about concrete stairs and being trapped." Lena shifted closer, seeking his warmth. "But I wake up here with you and remember that I'm safe, that I chose this life instead of having it chosen for me. We both did. Chose each other, chose freedom, chose to be imperfect people building something real instead of perfect people maintaining a facade." Marco wrapped his arms around her, solid and steady. "I love you, Lena Vale. Every damaged, stubborn, brilliant part of you. I love you too. Every controlling, obsessive, surprisingly tender part of you." She kissed him slow and deep, morning light streaming through windows. "Now, what were you saying about breakfast?" They rose together, Marco cooking while Lena made coffee, moving around the kitchen with practiced ease of people who'd learned each other's rhythms. Outside, Santorini gleamed white and blue under brilliant sunshine, the sea stretching endless and free. Somewhere in Rome, Isabella was finishing her dissertation and planning her own future. Somewhere in Kentucky, Lena's family existed without her, their loss not hers to carry. Somewhere in the world, Derek probably still believed he'd broken her beyond repair. But here, in this kitchen with coffee brewing and Marco humming off-key while he cooked, Lena was whole. Not unbroken. She'd carry those scars forever, but healed in ways that mattered. She'd chosen love over fear, trust over isolation, being seen over staying invisible. Had learned that safety wasn't about hiding, but about building with someone who valued her autonomy as much as her presence. "What are you thinking about?" Marco asked, catching her staring. "How far we've come. How different this is from where we started." "You mean when I was stalking you and planning elaborate seductions?" "Exactly that. You were terrifying. And now? Now you're just annoying." But Lena's smile took the sting from the words. "Annoying and mine." "Yours," Marco agreed, pulling her close. "Always yours. No matter how controlling I get or how independent you insist on being, we're stuck with each other." I can think of worse fates. They ate breakfast on the terrace, planning their day with the kind of mundane discussion that would have bored anyone listening. Groceries to buy, bills to pay, a dinner date with friends later that week. Normal, domestic, beautifully ordinary. The kind of life Lena had stopped believing she could have. The kind Marco had spent years thinking he didn't deserve. But they'd fought for it, through fear and danger and their own damaged patterns. Had chosen each other repeatedly, consciously, even when easier options existed. Had learned that love wasn't about finding someone perfect, but about building something real with someone equally flawed. As the sun climbed higher and the day stretched ahead full of possibility, Lena looked at her husband and felt gratitude so profound it ached. Not for rescue, she'd rescued herself, but for companionship in that rescue, for someone who'd seen her broken and still believed she could be whole. Marco caught her looking and smiled, that slight curve of lips she'd first noticed in a restaurant corner table a lifetime ago. The smile that had promised danger and possibility in equal measure, that had drawn her from hiding into visibility. "I see you," he said quietly, echoing words from their beginning. "I've always seen you." "I know," Lena replied, and meant it completely. "That's why I stayed." They finished breakfast in comfortable silence while Santorini gleamed around them, two people who'd rewritten their stories and chosen each other in the process. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but possible, built on honesty and choice and the stubborn belief that damaged people could create something whole together. It wasn't the ending Lena had imagined when she'd fled to this island seeking distance from her pain, but it was better, real instead of perfect, earned instead of given, chosen instead of settled for. She'd come to Santorini to disappear and instead had learned to be seen, had met a man as damaged as she was, and built something neither could have alone. And that, finally, was enough.